We can join the meeting with this, and it'll be still live streaming. Is the idea?
Do you want me to check on as you want to start?
Right. How is it so fucking lucky this table? You. All right. Can I have the Zoom meeting ID? Got it. Participant.
Little up arrow. Well, no, invite.
Just copy invite.
Press the invite button. Oh God.
That's helpful. Email.
I'm just going to email it.
Oh yeah, I know. No. Copy invite link. Copy invitation. So copy invitation. And then just put it into a text document. Copy invitation to a text document. And then that should have the meeting ID. Read it.
Computer scientist.
Whoa,
I know what I'm doing.
846 5226.
Oh look, I see your live video. Okay.
0458. Passcode 79910.
Say it out loud.
Never mind.
There's no secret.
100. Johnny meeting. Got it. Mute. Cool. I think that's fine.
Okay, but now I can't. Actually, it's not very slow. I don't know how behind we are.
Okay, now leave that be. I'm going to swap this to Zoom. And I think
I might need to mute it. Might need to mute it. Can you put it back? So I need to mute.
did you not mute it?
Thing 1, 2, 3. Hello, Jacob. Can you hear us? It's
I'll do.
So that's on.
Hello. Oh God, that works. Hello, everyone. Thank you, John. Is everybody ready to rumble? That's what we want. Okay, so based on the usual things happening, we've got a slightly rearranged schedule, but other than that, I think we're ready to go. So for starters, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you have a nice time. We've got drinks and sweets and biscuits and stuff here, but I ask if you just don't interrupt people's talks to grab those. Other than that, I think we're good to go. I should probably say something about like fire exits and stuff, but who cares? So without further ado, our first speakers are Cara Green and Natalia Abramenko from PwC, who are coming to talk about cybersecurity, crisis, and resilience. So I'll pass over to them.
Hello. Oh, that's fun. As Jacob just said, we're going to be talking about crisis and resilience. That's the team we sit in at PwC. So I think we're going to go through a few brief introductions and backgrounds on us. So I joined same time as Cara in 2021 during sort of COVID. My background is primarily events. So I used to work in financial services events and then local government and public policy events. And then prior to that, I did a master's in security studies at UCL, which was essentially looking at conflict and conflict resolution. And I focused on cyber warfare, in particular, the cyber warfare strategy of Russia against Ukraine, which seems pretty pertinent at the moment. And that was my background and my entryway into cyber.
Thank you. We are going to slightly awkwardly pass the mic between us, but I'm Cara. I am also in the crisis and resilience team at PwC. And prior to that, I was at uni. I studied maths and physics. So that was kind of my pathway into cyber. We're going to sort of take you through a bit of an overview of what we do as a team, take maybe a bit of a deep dive into some of the more ransomware specific elements that we do.
So I think the first thing we wanted to really cover off is what technically is a crisis, which sounds a bit patronizing. It's really not meant to be. It's because we didn't even really know that there are these levels of crisis and incidents and what the difference really is. This graph up here basically just shows you the kind of view that a business would have of where a crisis starts and what it looks like. So I think here we talk about the classic rapid incidents, which could be something like Gary Lineker, maybe. So something that you were not expecting and it happened, and now you're going to have to respond, and none of the plans that you have are able to respond to that. You have to really think on your feet, and it's sort of cross-organization. It's impacting a lot of different people. We've got hidden crises, so they build up and they go undetected. So a couple of, I think it was last year, a gaming company where it was found out that they were treated being really sexist, or they were treating women unfairly. And that was a kind of bubbling crisis where there were a lot of people talking about it, but it didn't really get managed well until it actually turned into a crisis. And then we have things like our supply chain issues, anything to do with operational resilience activities or business continuity, which we're not really going to go into much, but those are other things that we focus on when we look at crises. And then here we also have on this sort of level of disruption. So maximum disruption that a business can withstand and the maximum acceptable disruption for the customer. So they're slightly different. It's what are you providing to the client and whether you can continue to provide what you provide for the client and how impacted they are. So for example, an energy and utilities firm, it's going to be very difficult for them to continue providing if they've been hit by a ransomware attack and all their systems are down. So they've got quite a low tolerance for incidents. These are just some examples of incidents and crises that we've kind of dealt with. So this, it says current, a couple more could be added there, like I said, the kind of Gary Lineker one. One of the ones we're going to be talking about throughout the presentation today is the cyber attack on the Irish Health Service. So I don't know if people remember this or looked into this, but back in 2021, there was a ransomware incident for the Irish Health Service. It was one of the most significant attacks on the Irish state and on national infrastructure. And essentially it was, I think it said, a criminal gang known as Wizard Spider, and they used the Conti ransomware, and it was an attack that came out of Russia. And apparently it was reported in 2022, so this number is probably much higher now, that the cost of that cyber attack had officially reached 18 million euros. And that's in terms of how much money they lost while being down, how much money they lost in just generally recovering. So a lot of people were impacted with that, and we're going to look a bit more into that a little bit later on as well.
So I'll just give you a bit of an overview of where we actually come into this. So as we say, we deal with a huge range of crises. Our team do primarily sit within cyber, looking at cyber crises, but we also do a huge range of crises, whether that's reputational, whether that's ESG, sort of environmental crises, kind of anything and anything that can disrupt a business's operations, we will either come in and help or help you prepare for. So we start on that kind of prepare side of things, which is what we're going to talk quite a lot about today, helping organizations try and plan for this, but also build up the skills so that when all else fails, they don't have plans and it turns actually into a crisis, they can effectively essentially keep level-headed and find ways to deal with this. We also can then help when this does happen. So if clients are experiencing a crisis, they can call us. We can go in and help them try and manage that, whether that's sort of organizing the overall response that an organization has to a crisis, or whether that's, so our team are primarily looking at that more business element of things. We do have sort of a corresponding team, the incident response team at PwC, that look at the more technical side of things. So they can go in, for example, in a ransomware incident, actually looking at decrypting systems and things like that, whereas we support more of the organizational response to that. As I've mentioned, we look at ESG crises, looking at how organizations can sort of plan for events that we can see coming in the future and we know are going to be disruptive, but we haven't yet experienced, and so we don't yet know how to deal with. We have a team that looks at crisis leadership, getting those sort of mindset skills, and actually preparing for how you would lead an organization through a crisis. We have a particular expert in our team who's just set up a big crisis leadership center, and she has people coming from a huge range of backgrounds, whether that's military backgrounds, government, people in business, and looking at the different ways that they deal with crises. And we also have the culture team. So a lot of the crises that we see, particularly within cyber, come from the culture within an organization. So whether that's not having good security awareness, your staff clicking on phishing emails, for example. A lot of crises start within the organization, and also the culture within the organization very much affects how you might be able to manage a crisis when it does take place. So that's something we look at as a team as well. So as I said, on that prepare side of things, one of the things we do is what we call exercising. So that's when we will develop a scenario, which we always make sure is tailored to the organization, completely realistic. We look at that from the technical elements all the way up to how the business leadership might respond to things. And we essentially simulate a cyber attack, or so we'll look at cyber specific ones now, but we do exercises for all kinds of scenarios. Recently, I've been working on mass UK power outages, or scenarios that affect the UK power network in general. But we do a range of different types of exercises. This can range from just sort of sitting in a room with a company's leadership team, talking them through how they might respond, some of the challenges that they might face, some of the decisions they might be asked to make. A lot of the time what we see is there are no good answers. There's no good options left. You're sort of left to choose the least worst option in a crisis, and helping them think through what that would feel like in advance. And that ranges all the way up to sort of simulation exercises where we are live simulating an attack on them. It's all developing in real time. We might be sending in phone calls, us picking up the phone, pretending to be anyone and everyone, government organizations ringing you, putting pressure on you, journalists, media. We simulate ransom notes. We find ourselves mocking up all sorts of things, BBC News articles, BBC News reels. Our day-to-day can look quite different. Nat recently was mocking up, what was it?
Fake person. So we had to create a fake person to, with an AI face and have them like on a red carpet to simulate someone that could be in a reputationally damaging incident.
So you can see up there some of the things that we've mocked up, whether that's news articles, tweets, posts from the attacker's website, threatening to leak data. All of these are based on incidents that we have seen take place. And so the left-hand side of the screen is just talking about these different types of exercising that we do and the different ways that we look at this. So we will interview our client and really get to know their organization as best we can before we start planning this scenario, so that all the way up from exercising the most technical teams who are really going to challenge you and say, well, that would never happen because I've got this control in place. We've interviewed them, we've talked to them, we know what their vulnerabilities are, and we have planned our scenario to be something that could plausibly happen to them. And that's something we'll go into a little bit more in a minute, but we plan that all the way through to making sure that the impacts we are creating are really important to the business. So a lot of the time, the questions that we're asking these people when we're interviewing them is, actually, if you were sat next to the attacker and you wanted to really damage this business, what would you tell them to do? What would you tell them to look for? What would you tell them to leak? What would you tell them to break? And then we simulate doing that. So it's really interesting to see how some of the executives respond to this, because I think a lot of the things that we find are issues that they've actually never thought of before. I worked for a client recently who were a manufacturer of soft drinks. They had implemented this amazing new technology in their warehouses that allowed them to stack pallets 5 times higher than a normal warehouse could. It was massively efficient, hugely saved on space, really cutting edge technology. But what they hadn't considered was all these pallets had to be moved by robots so that the warehouse could be packed sort of as tightly as possible. Well, actually, we found that there was a vulnerability that meant we could essentially stop all of those robots working. They couldn't get anything in or out of the factory. And because it was so tightly packed, no humans could get in there either. So essentially their warehouse was completely locked down. They had no stock. They couldn't ship anything until they solved this problem. And it's just things like that that they just had never come to mind for them before. But a really interesting way to get to know an organization really well.
So yeah, as Caragh was saying, that when we build these technical exercise, when we build our exercise, they're all sort of based on this one technical foundation. And it was really interesting. We recently did one where we created sort of a honeycomb of impact. So we would have one impact where, for example, the attacker came in via a third-party laptop. And then that was sort of the first honeycomb. And then it had this spread through the different systems. So it would be, now they've created command and control over here, and they've gotten in laterally and started moving around. And at the same time, this is what the client would be seeing. So they'd be getting a notification here saying that this is a bit off, they shouldn't have been accessing X system. And then here's a bit of a report, but we still don't know what it is. This is a level 1, as we would say. So it's business as usual. It's something we can work with. And then actually, oh no, we're now seeing this as more of a level 2, and we need to get some people together to really figure out what we're doing here and what's going on, because we have no information. And so that's kind of where it came into sort of gauging how complex to make the scenario. So normally, Companies vary by industry, was what I found, in terms of how well prepared they are for a crisis, especially a cyber crisis. So financial services, for example, they've been digitizing a lot of their processes and a lot of their platforms for a very long time now. So they're quite good at planning. They're also very heavily regulated. So it means that they have to prove to the regulator that they've planned for this, that they have a way to fix it. Nobody wants 2008 again. They have to have liquidity processes and plans. So that they're normally quite good. Other firms, or smaller firms in particular, might not be as good, but they can still hold really sensitive data. So for example, we like to hit personally identifiable information. If that's sold on the dark web, that's an issue because you can be fined by the regulator. I think it's 5% of your profit. So that can be quite a lot of money for people. And once we've done that, once we've gauged how complex to make it, so how well can you respond to this incident, we look at the high level scenario. So what is the totality of the impact? So we don't just say we want to hit endpoints like we've got up there, or we want to hit Active Directory and stop people from logging in. We want to ensure that based on the objectives of the company, what they want to test, we're able to do that with the technical scenario. So if we want to test how well people respond to not having any backups, then we'll hit backups if we can. It's things like that. We try and have a high level overview of what the scenario needs to achieve. Then we need to think about specifically what the participants would see in each phase. So phase one is normally the one where shit hits the fan, you don't know anything, you have zero idea of what's going on, and you need to be making decisions really quickly because people can't log in, people are calling you up, people are coming into the office, they can't use their key cards to get in. So what are you doing to fix that? Phase two, you get a bit more information, and actually that's kind of the most information heavy phase. So you're having to figure out how do you review that information, how do you maintain situational awareness, as we say, so everyone knows what's going on, and how do you respond to that in a way that works for the business? So how are you prioritizing things? You might have one person saying we really need to get finance back up, whereas someone in the technical team is sat there saying, well, actually the finance systems really are based on SAP, and if we can't get SAP back up, we're not getting anything back up, and that's going to take 2 weeks. So it's like knowing how to prioritize.
Just one thing to add to that is often it's that interaction between teams that's really interesting, because the business leaders are putting a lot of pressure on technical teams to actually recover these things without really understanding the sequence in which it needs to be done. So while the business might be saying, well, I need this back immediately because this is having an impact on my clients and we are losing money immediately because of this, the technical teams might be saying, well, actually we're 10 days, we're 3 weeks, 3 months even away from having that system back. That's not the priority right now because we have to rebuild X, Y, and Z before we can even think about that. And managing that kind of communication between the two teams and sort of almost translating one to the other, making them aware of the limitations on each side is one of the bits that I find really interesting.
And particularly in those operational, so we have what we call the operational exercise where there's more technical detail, and the recovery exercise of how you would actually recover, which is a lot of IT people in there, and not always the CISO, but sometimes the CISO. That's always really interesting because everyone in the room turns to them. And I was recently in an exercise where the technical person was actually an observer, so they weren't playing, but none of the executive knew what was going on. So they kept turning to the technical person and go, be like, I can't tell you any of that. And by the end, he had to give in and was just like, yeah, it's going to take us about 3 weeks. And they had planned, and that was in phase 3, and they'd planned so much on the basis that they could recover it in about 3 days. And that was really interesting to see how sometimes how discordant the business and IT are.
I think that's something that people really underestimate as well, is the length of time that it might take you to recover from a ransomware attack. So what we typically see, and I was recently working on a live response, actually, I was in the call, again, it was the business turning to the IT team saying, you know, just give us an estimate. How long do you think it's going to be before we return to business as usual? And I think the response shocked everybody because he was saying, well, actually, we're talking about 3 weeks before you've even got a functioning laptop. We're talking probably up to a year before this is business as usual again. And this is something that happened within hours. They started noticing weird things that morning. By that afternoon, they can manufacture, they can do anything, people can access their laptops. And suddenly this guy in IT is saying, well, actually, you're not going to be able to do anything for a year. The length of time that these can span for is massive.
Yeah, we normally say, and we'll go through this a bit later, but 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. So 3 days to figure out what's going on, 3 weeks to actually start responding, and 3 months to start recovery. And there are a lot of companies that even a year later will still say, we're never going to recover from this completely. We're just going to have to figure out how to work in a new way now. That is just not going to happen. Then the final point on this is just to sense check it. So one of the big things that we always say is, whether you're a very technical person, you still need to understand the systems in which you're working. So a lot of people might know about finance systems and the digital platforms that are used there, but if they're working on an energy and utilities client, that's a completely different system. And you're not expected to know how all of those interact and how all those work. So we just say, share the risk. We do sit in risk technically, and the last thing we want to be doing is taking on more risk.
So the other side of things we do is we help them on this prepare kind of angle. And then again, we can help in a live incident as well. So there's just some common myths and misconceptions here about ransomware attacks in particular. So it's not illegal to pay a ransom. If you're ransomed by a ransomware group, it is not illegal to pay the ransom. However, often these groups, they're very well established groups. They're highly professional organizations. It's not sort of one person doing this on their own. Often they have links, or members within the group are sanctioned entities, and it is illegal to pay the sanctioned entities. So it can be legally a really complex environment to be operating in. You don't often know who's necessarily doing the attack in the early days, and you have to be really careful about who you're paying if you choose to pay. If we pay, we won't get a decryption key or our data back. So a lot of execs really worry that they're going to pay out £15 million in a ransom, and then the attacker's going to just not give them the decryption key anyway. It's not actually something we see very often, because as I said, these groups are super professional organizations. This is their business model. If they did that and they didn't give you the key after you paid, nobody's going to pay them further down the line. So what we actually see is they are really helpful if you pay them. They have customer service helplines. You can go onto chatbots. You can say, you know, I don't know how to use this key. I don't know what I'm doing with it. And they'll help you out. We've even seen cases of people paying, the customer service helping them, they get their systems back. And then the attacker group, just as a real nail in the coffin, will send them a customer satisfaction survey saying, how did we do? So generally they are quite trustworthy in that respect. If we pay a ransom, we might get targeted again by the same group or a different entity. Again, it wouldn't be good for their business if they did that. If they keep hitting the same people are just going to say, well, I'm not going to pay you because you're just going to do it again. So we actually don't see that. By a different group or different criminals, that is sometimes the case. The vulnerabilities that these attackers have found, if you don't effectively cover them off afterwards. So something we do a lot of is post-incident reviews. We look at what happened during the incident, what were the vulnerabilities that led to the incident, and we help businesses come up with a plan to change that in the future. But if that isn't managed effectively, there's absolutely no reason that somebody can exploit the same vulnerability again. We will recover much more quickly if we pay. This is also not true. We often see that people think it's a quick fix. You pay for this ransom decryption key, they give you a customer service help, you're fine, sorted. It's not the case. Essentially, they are trustworthy in that respect. They will give you the key, but these keys often contain backdoors and vulnerabilities that can then be used to exfiltrate data and things like that. Once you get a key, you very much have to reverse engineer it. You have to check its vulnerabilities. That can take a long time. And then even then, it's going to take you a very long time to decrypt all your systems. It's often not any quicker than actually rebuilding from scratch a lot of the time. But this last point, paying a ransom is, not my last point. What we often see is the difference between people deciding to pay and not pay actually doesn't come down to the time it's going to take them to recover. We often find that it's going to be the same length of time either way. But people often find that their data is also being held at ransom. So the attackers are saying, if you don't pay, we're going to leak sensitive data on the dark web. And actually often stopping that leak of data is the reason people decide to pay the ransom. So this is just kind of an overview of the role that we actually help with in this crisis. So as I said earlier, we can look at this, we can go in and play this chief of staff role. So we'll sit in with the exec. We've got very experienced team members who have dealt with all kinds of crises, right up from like kidnap negotiations all the way through to military and things like that. We can play that kind of coordinating role. There's lots of people who are very stressed, under a lot of pressure. They might not have slept properly in weeks because of this. And we're there to kind of take that organizational part away from them and very much say, okay, we've got an hour to make a decision on this thing. Let's hear from you, let's hear from you, let's hear from you. Okay, draw a line under that. What's the decision? Let's move on. We're very much a kind of almost people management in that space. But we can also help the operational teams. Again, we have that instant response separate part that deal with more technical side. We can also help with development of policy within crisis. So what are people allowed to do? What are they allowed to say? We can open a situation center, which again is managing that kind of almost forward thinking of where could this develop? How's it affecting us? How are people perceiving us from outside of the organization? And then again, communications, we have lots of crisis communications experts that can help you manage what you're saying to who, about what and when, because there are lots and lots of examples of when that can go wrong.
So this is just a slightly more fun slide. This is less about what we do, but these are the kind of things that have been overheard in a crisis exercise in terms of people actually saying this. So this one is brilliant. It was an exiting chairman who thought that 1 million was not a lot of money and was just happy to pay that from his own pocket. This is someone who said, and this is a very valid point, people be tired, we should hire a masseuse. I wouldn't say a masseuse, but people do get tired. We've seen people sleeping in offices. We've seen people trying to figure out how they would call their family, people in natural disasters. I think there was like a snowstorm once. One of our partners was in the middle of a snowstorm, just holed up in a room, helping an incident response and couldn't get home for like a week. People thinking that they've got friends in Russia. This was actually your one. This is something that you saw in your exercise.
This was, yeah, so not a live incident, but a crisis response exercise. We'd previously done one with the technical team, and this guy, Patrick, had mocked up a briefing for the CEO who read it and said, oh, who's this Patrick guy? Can we fire him? Because the briefing was so bad. And he didn't know Patrick was sat next to him or that Patrick was a real person.
A couple more where people actually just say, read the plan. That is absolutely terrible, terrible advice. As much as it is good to have a plan, when it's a crisis, like we said, a lot of the time you have to flex. You have to make sure that you can really respond to the incident, because plans are there to provide a handrail, right? They're not there to provide a step-by-step, a play-by-play. You can have a playbook, for example, that gives you the technical details of how you would recover a system or how you would turn something off. But in terms of a crisis, there is no way that you can just follow a plan and expect that to provide a good response. This is a similar one where these, so this was one client who had prepared not for a cyber attack, but they had a plan for a plane crashing into one of their buildings. So you feel like sometimes you have to tell people that you should probably plan for something that's going to impact, be a bit more likelihood to impact you than a plane crashing into your building. And this one was a genuine one. This was a massive corporation, and they would have actually needed to call the White House and the president to notify them of an issue and potentially get them to take over the response. And we actually see that in this country as well. So for example, if you're national critical infrastructure or you're a government body, the NCSC and the government will set up a COBRA meeting, and they may take the response out of your hands if you're just not doing a good enough job. And it's probably not in your best interest to be that bad at your job that Rishi Sunak has to come in and take over. And then this is the final one that I just loved. That was one of my favorites. I think that was the actual chair of the crisis. So, and then this one is, so this is kind of the last phase of what we do. So we went through the prepare, we went through the actual incident, and now post-incident review. And this is where HSE comes in. So I'm not going to read all of that, but I will give a brief overview what that is. So when HSE were hit with a cyber attack, they had to actually rebuild, fix, try and figure out how they move on from here. And they brought PwC in to do a post-incident review. And this is all public knowledge. It was on the BBC. You can actually read this report. It's just the Conti cyber attack on the HSE. Very long report. It's very detailed. I think it's something like 100 pages. It took months of people's time to write it. And how it was done was people would have interviews with actual nurses, doctors, oncologists, anyone in the HSE at the time, and they would sit there and they'd say, so basically what happened? And our colleagues would come off of calls with nurses who were just like crying and saying, look, we had to figure out who we were going to operate on. Could we give someone chemotherapy today? We have people with like tumors that we wouldn't be able to see them with imaging services. And if we couldn't see them, then we'd have to if we did the operation, it'd be incredibly risky and dangerous. But do we save this person's life by doing a risky operation? Or do we just let that tumor grow? And it was essentially impossible to do anything. It says here 80% of their IT infrastructure was like wiped out. And recently it's also been coming out that a lot of data was lost. I think the last number I saw was 150,000 people's individual personal identifiable information and health data was lost and stolen and ransomed off. And so we did this urgent PIR on the technical and operational preparedness. And actually we found out that they were not prepared at all. And it's not something that is just a problem with the HSE, it's actually a problem across all businesses that we see. A lot of businesses don't tend to invest in this area because it is risk, and risk doesn't make money. It's not trading, it's not selling services to clients. It's something that you do to prevent you from stopping those activities. So a lot of people don't invest enough money or time, and especially when cyber is becoming a massive issue. And here it's a really interesting point where someone's basically said, read it and learn. And essentially it's something that a lot of companies we are hoping can use and look at the common pitfalls, because there are a lot of similarities between them and other companies. And we want people to be able to look at that and actually internalize that and see if they can do anything in their own businesses to stop that from happening. Because obviously, if it's finance, yeah, sure, a couple of people might be impacted, but it's very unlikely that people are going to die or people are going to be left with traumatic illnesses and things like that. So it's yeah, easy to say, hard to do. And we're going to go on to a Slido, which is going to be slightly less, far less sad. But if you could either scan that code, please, or, oh, sorry, go online and then type in Crisis UOB and then click join. You should be able to get in. Put that first question up there. Can you guys vote on these as well? Yeah, you are able to vote. Cool.
Can you see how many people have joined?
Yeah, there's 37.
Oh, nice. So just to give you a little bit of background while you do that, ransomware groups, this is not a quick, they go in, they ransom you immediately. They can spend months and months in your systems before they actually do anything. And what we often see they do is they'll look for the most sensitive documents, etc., that they can, so that when they threaten to leak your data on the dark web, that's as sensitive as it can be. Often what we find is that they'll check for insurance documents. So some organizations will have cyber insurance. They will then very cleverly match the price of their ransom to your cyber insurance, so that when you say, actually, we can't afford that, we can't pay that, they say, well, actually, here's your insurance document. We know you can, because you can just pay it using your insurance. Yeah.
So hopefully a lot of people have voted. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, so good guess. $265 billion. It's a huge business. I think in 2020, roughly 60% of UK organizations suffered a ransomware attack. So it's a lot more common than you think it is.
So this next one is obviously about which industries do we think tend to be targeted the most. Cara mentioned earlier that bit of background, obviously they operate like a business. Some of them have HR departments. Some of them put out job adverts. Sometimes if you've been hit and you're the one recovering a system, the attacker might contact you and say, hey, we think you've got really great technical skills. Do you want to come work for us? It's actually quite interesting to see people just sending out job adverts for illicit things like that. Should we reveal? So this one was actually interesting. It was banking in that sense. And I think part of that is because you could steal sort of credit card information, you could steal personally identifiable information. I like watching people changing their answers, voting now, good stuff.
So where do most of the ransomware gangs originate? We often see that the motive of the attack will depend very much on where this organization is from. We have teams who are specifically dedicated to tracking certain threat actors, looking at their patterns. For example, a lot of North Korean attacks actually have the motive of stealing farming and manufacturing IP because they're so far behind the times that they're actually trying to steal that data from other organizations. The answer to this one is Iran. It surprised me too. I think we've just got one more. And what's the average downtime? We might have revealed this earlier on. What's the average downtime a company experiences after a ransomware attack?
And downtime here includes how long it takes to recover all of your systems, how long your company might be not operating, not providing the critical services that you should be to clients, how long it takes to recover from backups or to reverse engineer the decryptor. So in that one, yeah, 22 days exactly. And that's actually probably quite short. Yeah. A lot of the companies we see there, it's a lot longer than that. It's more like 3 months than it is 3 weeks. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Wait, thank you for the talk. Okay, so next up, would you go for Iran? So Iran is a lecturer at the school doing AI and robotics, who is ready to talk, hopefully. Perfect. Cool, we're just going to set some stuff. If you want, yeah, more snacks. Matthew knows.
Well, if I unmute myself when I hear the play next, it would be very loud and people would be.
Yeah. See if it works, because you should be unmuted now.
No, it's,
Well, that's the computer.
well, I can hear this, but it's not going to be loud for this.
No.
Or we can use this.
Yeah, let's try that, I reckon.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
It might not be great, but
there should be an option somewhere. Let me see if I can Google where it is. There's definitely an option somewhere to pass through audio, system audio. To share screen.
But when I share a screen, I always share a screen that has stuff too.
yeah. Are there any options?
Oh, no, found it. So if we come back out to Zoom, under share screen, or do you want to just mute that? Sorry. Micah, no. No. It doesn't like it. That's all.
Okay, in which case, yeah. Okay, everyone sitting comfortably? Excellent. In which case, the next speaker is Iran. Yours, please.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, it's actually loud. Oh, hello everyone. I just learned that I'm from Iran, and I just learned that we had the most gang or whatever in the world. So, and also I learned that I should have used a slider, which I have no idea what it was. So, all right. Thanks for the invitation. I'm a lecturer in computer science, School of Computer Science, and I'm a roboticist and I teach advanced robotics. But my topic today is about robots, but is also about culture. It's not really that technical, but it is relevant to basically computer science a lot. And this is a topic I do research on that. I do cultural robotic, and I do a bunch of other research, which is not relevant to this talk. So the entire presentation is based on the video, which I learned that the video doesn't work. Let's see if it doesn't work. That would not be a good idea, but let's try. Okay, it's not really working. Even not that. Okay. What you've seen in this video, which is supposed to be that it had a sound and is echoed, is not really interesting. Okay, I'm going to explain what's happening here. It's an official video of Caragh's project. Is a European project which involve UK, I mean, it's finished, but the UK, Sweden, Italy, and non-EU country, Japan. And basically the video says, now we know how to put robot in a factory. What we don't know, how to make a culturally competent robot. For example, this robot now can deal with a British person, and this robot can deal with the Japanese person, and this robot knows how to bring appropriate food to an Indian person. And all the other robots, which used to be in the factory, are so jealous because these robots are very smart. And this video want to show cases when the robot is culturally sensitive, culturally competent, or culturally aware. And in different situations for elderly people, and yeah, and now everyone is a healthcare system and everyone is happy. So, what do you think of this video? Do you like to have such a robot that's culturally sensitive? Any idea? Okay, some thumbs up. Is there anyone watching this video and says, no? Feels a bit weird. What do you think is not good? Okay. Why is weird? Okay. Right. So, spoiler alert, that's going to be the talk about precisely that. I'm going to talk about what he answered and actually what you mentioned. I don't know your name. Then the rest of the presentation, I'm going to explain how it can actually be interesting for computer science. And as a computer scientist, if you want to achieve this, you can do much better. So what did culture mean for this project? I should have done a Slido, I learned today, but I didn't. What does culture mean in that video? Stereotype, what else? Context awareness. Is about, can you speak loud? Right. So, but I may agree or disagree with you, but these guys doing this project, actually the Swedish university that involved in that project, I was working in that before I came to UK. I was working in Sweden, and in the same university was involved in this project. That's actually how I know about the project. And they name it culture. So for them, what is shown in the video was culture. And it was only not in Swedish, it's a British university, also Japanese and Italian. So in this project, culture was equal to nationality. Basically, if you notice that in the video, the robot decides how far it has to stand in front of the person based on this nationality. For some reason, a robot decided to get closer to Japanese person, whereas it stands further away from the British person, which is also a choice of a British person also is also interesting in this showcase. And again, this is not my slide, this is the official video of this project. So this is culture equal to nationality. And this equation has a name. Well, basically do you think culture does equate nationality? For some people does, people in this. So this is a great example of computational reduction. Computational reductionism, can you give an example of what is a computational reductionism in your life? Think about some COVID time and what UK government did. You should know that. You remember A-level fiasco. So, okay, now I see a lot of not. They try to make a very complicated decision, sort of reduce to where the people live, reduce based on the history of the school. And that's a great example of reducing a complex problem, a complex context to one or a couple of variable or parameter. In this case, a culture is reduced to nationality, basically. That's a great example of computational reductionism. And you guys, regardless of what you're going to do in the future, being an academic, being in a company, whatever, try be better. So if you can't reduce a complex problem to a computer program, just don't. I mean, we don't need to do this. What is the problem with equating culture with nationality? In my opinion, if you say that the culture is equal to nationality, if a person is stateless, Geneva Convention 1954, which doesn't mean anymore in this country, so it means cultureless. I'm not saying that all these people attended on that project, they really say that, but that's a consequence of this. When you say that culture is equal to nationality, you are cultureless if you don't have a state. Also, it promotes the need for assimilation and also promote a generalized culture. So it ignored the historical diversity and it ignores marginalized people and it promotes a general culture. And the generalist culture obviously ignored the positive and transformative role of other cultures like subculture. And today, more than ever, at least in this country and many other countries in Europe, we see the problem with this ignorance. The problem gets even worse. It's not only people in those projects think that the culture is equal to nationality. This is a survey, it's quite a recent survey, 2021, done with a couple of colleagues, which I worked with, some of them in Glasgow and King College London. They look at the paper published in Cultural Robotics, in the context of cultural robotics, and they realize that almost all paper equate culture to nationality. When they have the robot, be they a robot change their behavior based on the culture, or they want to interpret the human behavior based on the culture, their meaning of culture is nationality. So, of course, it's some exception. For example, the first paper, Selma Savanovich, she is a pioneer of criticizing this. So what I'm criticizing, I'm not the first one. She started criticizing this from 2014. And there are some other work criticizing this notion of culture, but definitely is a minority. And my today talk is basically to promote, not to talk about necessarily cultural robotics, it's talking against the computational reductionist. So what does culture mean? This is a book, Redefining Culture, and it has more than, is actually 313 definitions of culture in this book. So none of the roboticists bother themselves to this book and at least offer a couple of different explanation of culture for robotics. And that, again, it means it's a bad science. Be better. So in that book, they define themes of definition. So for example, the culture as a structure, the culture as pattern. Pattern is like a stereotype you mentioned. Culture as a stereotype, culture as a nationality is one definition out of many. It's not wrong, but there are others. Culture as process, product, function-based refinement, power, and ideology. Basically, it's interested in the question of what does culture, who does culture serve, rather than how it's created, and the group membership. For example, the culture as a pattern, as I said, you can think of a stereotype pattern, or cognitive structure, or system of ideas or behavior. Basically, a lot of work has been done on the cognitive science, and cognitive robotics can be studied to develop a culture as culture and pattern. Something is being used in robotics quite a lot, and roboticists love that, and computer scientists love that in general, is a culture as pattern or a structure. So, and they usually use something like Hofstadter cultural dimension. Hofstadter, he invented a model that basically associate and define 6 dimensions which interpreted culture and assign each country a number to each dimension. For example, in individualism, China is 20 and Brazil is 38. Don't ask me how they come up with those numbers. Or long-term orientation, Germany is 83 and China is 87. And you can easily imagine why this is very most used model, because it has number. We know exactly how to deal with number. It's great. You know, it has number 40, 68. I can do whatever. I can do a lot of computation. And I can tell, okay, if the individualism number is less than something, the robot goes closer to the person. Or if it's bigger than something, the robot can get further. As stupid as it sounds, this is exactly in a lot of research in HRI is implemented like that. And yeah, and we should be loud and clear how this number is nonsense. A country of more than 2 million people, how you can reduce and attach one number to that diverse population. And culture as product, obviously, is different when you want to use culture in a, so I don't know, entertainment industry, put a robot in the square of a town or a robot in the healthcare. The type of culture you can imagine to implement, the kind of definition is different. So what we should do if you want to do cultural robotics, my talk is not about not to use culture, but we, as I said, we have to be better. I wrote a paper on a call for epistemic analysis of cultural theories for AI method. What does this mean? This guy is a father of AI, John McCarthy. How many of you have you ever heard of him? Oh, nice. Okay, there are some people at least. So he wrote a very influential paper about epistemological and computational adequacy. What does this mean? It means that if we have a problem and we want to use a logic and knowledge representation, we have to think among the pool of logical knowledge representation we have to think whether that knowledge representation is expressive enough for what we want to represent, and whether it's computationally adequate, meaning that okay, this is a really great logic. It can represent whatever we want, but doing any sort of reasoning with that take ages. So it's not computationally adequate. So basically in this paper, it explained these two concepts. And I think if you want to do cultural robotic, or for that matter, any complex context, we have to do this analysis. We have to think, we have to take examples of the definition of culture from the book. We know if you want to do robotic, there are lots of different methods in machine learning, in logic knowledge representation, computer vision. We have to think whether these methods can represent what I want. If I take a definition of culture from a process team, can a certain pattern recognition method in machine learning can represent that, can do efficiently reason about that definition? That analysis is something is lacking in this field. And I think it's, if someone wants to do this kind of research, should do that. How am I in time? Is there anyone can tell me how much I've got time? 9 minutes. Okay. Just tell me when I should finish. I can basically finish everything. So this is an example. This is a random definition of culture. I'm going to read it. So I just want to show you how this analysis could be done. So this is a Mark Fisher, 2007. Culture is not a variable. Culture is relational, is elsewhere, or is passage, is where meaning is woven and renewed, often through gaps and silence and forces behind the conscious control of individual, and yet serve as a space where the individual, institutional, social responsibility and ethical struggle take place. So it's a bit mouthful, social science, okay, but it says something interesting here. This definition of culture suggests that culture is not a set of patterns to be copied, it is in a continuous development, deprecation, and revival. What does this mean? I have to change this. So, okay, that wasn't a good choice as a slide. I took a paper, a very influential paper in cultural robotic, and that influential paper used description logic and ontology and Bayesian network to represent culture. And I took this example, this definition of culture, and tried to think that, okay, this influential paper that used this method, this description logic and Bayesian network to implement cultural definition, can describe this definition of culture. And as you can imagine, the answer is no. Why? I'm not going to explain what this description logic is. Some of you may know, but doesn't matter. But the description logic cannot do non-monotonic reasoning. And non-monotonic reasoning basically cannot change its mind. You reason about something and then you have got new information. You have to discard the information about past. It seems obvious, but this logic doesn't have this power. It's not expressive enough. And what Bayesian network, so that influential paper used Bayesian network for adapting the cultural preferences. It is stereotyped by the country, and this uses Bayesian network to change the preferences. Regardless of what you know or Bayesian network or not, how it works, I don't have time to go through this, but in order to be Bayesian network truly unbiased about the observation, you have a really good prior in order to not reason about biases. And most importantly, so culture is something that there is a lot of different factors affect culture: race, education, sexuality, age, etc., etc. And if you want to model this influence, you have to capture quite a strong dependency between the parameter, and your Bayesian inference become basically intractable if you model all of those interdependency. Basically, it's not computationally adequate to learn the true definition of culture, which has affected by all these parameters. And This is example. This is just an example of if you want to do epistemic analysis of a complex context, how we should do that. And yeah, I think I have these 3 slides. So another work I've done with the PhD student, of course, if you are saying that, okay, the stuff that we just said is not culture, you have to propose what it is. And what my proposition, and of course I did this with Mark and Gary, is culture is an emergent phenomena, which should emerge from subculture, from the individual interaction that you mentioned from the beginning. And also is a participatory mechanism. So the robot should participate to form the culture. We cannot just basically download how humans interact with each other and implement it to human robot culture. The way that we interact with our phone is different. The way we interact with another human being is kind of obvious. But the way that this cultural robotic did research is precisely they look at human and they want to transfer it to the human robot. And the definition of obviously emotion is very important, but emotion is very difficult topic to implement if you don't want to subscribe to reductionist model. And yeah, I think thanks for everyone who worked with me on this kind of stuff, with my PhD student and my collaborator. Thank you. Take question, or you just finish? Did you take question, or you just? Okay, everyone wants to have pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So we've not got one.
Is there not a plugin?
No. It's in that hole, but it's covered by the desk that we can't move. It's fucking stupid. Nearest plug's there or there.
At the far end. Or you can.
Test.
Mike's there. All right, everybody ready for the next talk? Woo! There we go. We've got some enthusiasm. That's right. Okay, the next speaker is Aaron from Majestic, who are kindly offering pizza tonight as well. Thank you, Aaron. Hand over.
Thank you so much. If I check my phone during the talk and not being rude, I'm getting you pizza, so. Cool, so I'm Aaron, I'm a developer at Majestic, and today I would like to take you all through the hacker's guide to resisting the AI apocalypse. There's 3 things I would like to cover in this talk. 1, I would like to cover some examples of AI going horribly, horribly wrong. 2, I would like to dive into a technical case study where I'm going to look at one example of it going wrong and talk about the actual underlying technical reasons as to how that might happen. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about how, if this is all going wrong, how much of a problem is this for all of us? So on with the examples. I saw this a while ago. These are the algorithms that dictate our lives. This Twitter user posted 2 Google search results. The first one is for world record Rubik's Cube 1 by 1, which according to Google was completed in an impressive 8 minutes and 59 seconds. And the other one is who invented running, which was apparently Thomas running when he tried to walk twice at the same time. So yeah, AI goes wrong. It can be quite funny. It can also be quite serious. Sometimes we have used AI to decide who is most deserving of a high-paying job, and AI hasn't necessarily decided that in a fair or equitable manner. Or we have used AI to automate the cropping of images. And when the AI is deciding what is most important to include and exclude from the image, it has not always done that in a fair way either. So those are 4 examples. Hopefully you're all on board. AI can go horribly wrong. So the case study. As a little bit of a background, I would invite you to study this graph up here. This is essentially a graph of how good over the years image recognition AI have got at recognizing images. So these are the results for best in each year for the ImageNet image recognition contest. You can see in 2010, 2011, AI were the bars represent how wrong the AI were. So you want them to be smaller. If the bar is smaller, the AI are getting image classifications less wrong. So 2010, 2011, AIs were so-so. 2012, we see a huge leap in performance. And as we approach 2014, we start to get some very exciting results because as the graph shows, AI actually begin approaching human levels of image recognition capabilities. And in 2015, finally, AI became better than humans at recognizing images. And there were 2 AI that achieved this. One was ResNet, and the other one was a model called Inception v3, which was developed by Google, which I'm going to be talking about today. So image recognition is now better done by machines than humans, but what might we use this for? So this is a picture of a cat. Hopefully we can all agree that. If we wanted to automate knowing what this image was, we could supply it to an AI and say, what is this? And it would say it's a cat. This is a picture of some guacamole. We could also supply this to an AI, and the AI would hopefully say, this is some guacamole. If, as a business case, we wanted to know the difference between cats and guacamole, we could supply the images to the AI, and much faster than, say, if we hired humans to do it, it could go, right, this is a cat, this is some guacamole, I think that's a cat, this is some guacamole. And that's amazing. You know, so many work hours saved, fantastic. Except unfortunately, some researchers from MIT fooled Google's AI into believing a cat was guacamole. So what's all that about? So I've been, Inception is 99% sure that that cat is guacamole. I have been a tiny bit sly with you though. I did not show you the original photograph of the cat. What you actually can see on the left here is the original photograph that was taken of the cat, which Inception believes has an 88% chance of being a tabby cat. However, what researchers did is they put the image through a process called adversarial perturbation and created the very similar image on the right, which apparently has a 99% chance of being guacamole. So what is adversarial perturbation? Quite complex wording. All it really means is researchers change the pixels of the image ever so slightly, imperceptible to the human eye, in such a way that they wanted to cause the AI to make a mistake. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they actually can achieve that. So to understand how to trick an AI, you need to understand a tiny bit about how an AI works. This is what I would refer to as an artist's impression of a neural network. All you really need to know is if it's an image recognition AI, it would take in an image. The middle bit would do a bunch of linear algebra. It's not especially important what it is, and it would attempt to classify the image. When you create a neural network, like if you install TensorFlow or PyTorch onto your computer and you create a brand new neural network, it is not going to be good at classifying images. You actually need to help it learn. And the way that this is achieved is through calculus. I'm not going to go through actual calculus today, but rather I'm going to give you a little visual example of how an AI might get better. So I'd invite you to imagine that the x-axis of this graph just represents how your AI is configured, and the E of x-axis represents how horribly wrong it is making mistakes. When you create a brand new AI, it's going to be very wrong. So our goal when we're training an AI is to get that dot to the bottom of the graph. In this two-dimensional graph, you can see with your clever human eyes and human brain that the bottom of the graph is there. But in an AI's case, it is doing this on a highly multi-dimensional plane. So you can't just go, oh, the bottom's here. We need to use calculus or gradient descent to actually figure out how to get to the bottom of this curve. Now, since we don't know where the bottom is, how might we achieve that? Well, we know where on the curve we are, and we can also use calculus to identify the direction which is downwards, which is, in this case, left. So when we're training an AI, we would figure out which way is down, move a little bit that way, and then it would be a little better. It would be a little less erroneous. We could do that again and again, and you get the idea. Eventually, you would get to the bottom of that graph, and the AI would end up being reasonably correct. When you're doing that, all you're doing is just editing the parameters of that hidden layer, improving the AI you initialized earlier. Okay, so that's how we make an AI better, or a very fast, high-level version of it. But how are we going to trick the AI? Well, to make an AI do better, I talked about minimizing the amount of error. So maybe to make an AI worse, we could maximize the error. So, so I talked a little bit about minimizing the error function. When we maximize the error function, it would be unfair if I just went into the internals of the AI and hacked it to pieces. We're actually going to maximize the error function, but with respect to the image. We can use calculus to figure out how to change the values in the AI, but we can also use calculus to figure out how to change the values of an image to cause it to make a mistake. So if you imagine we have an image, it's been successfully classified with a very high confidence. We can also graph that as error, and it's going to have quite a low amount of error if it's been classified correctly. But again, same trick as before. We know where we are on the graph, and in this case, we know which way is up, which is left. If we edit this, if we go through this, we make it a little more erroneous, and then we go through again and again. And actually, if you start messing with an image, you can very quickly make the classification wrong without having to change many of its pixels whatsoever. I fancied giving this a little go by myself, so I downloaded all these lovely images of candles from Google, and before I started tricking it, just to be fair, I asked Inception, do you know what these images are of? And in every case, you know, bunged it into PyTorch, and in every case, Inception said, yeah, that's a candle, obviously. What I then did is I wrote a quick Python script, and I essentially for each image said, please keep changing in the way that causes the most problems until you are misclassified. And these are the results I got. Inception thinks that that is an image of a jack-o'-lantern, and that the bottom one is an image of a lighter. I quite like these results. These are two other light sources that, yeah, look reasonably similar, but I still think they're clearly candles. But it also thought that this was an image of a paper towel, and this was an image of a vase. I know that these things are subjective, but hopefully we can all agree these are still images of candles, and they don't look necessarily doctored or anything. That was fun, but this isn't actually what the researchers did, because the researchers didn't just take this cat and go, we're going to turn it into something else. They took this cat and decided we are going to turn this cat into guacamole specifically. This is what is called a targeted adversarial attack. So same as before, but we don't just want it to be wrong. We want it to be wrong in exactly the way we intend it to be wrong. So how might we go about this? Well, we still need to manipulate the images. We can't just maximize the error function because that will just get us a random wrong answer. So what the researchers decided to look into is maybe we could manipulate the images to minimize the error function for the wrong classification. So if we go back to this artist's impression of the AI, we would have a cat. And what we're essentially saying is, right, cat, we need to change this so that you are incorrectly classified as guacamole. So if we measure the cat against the guacamole, you have the lowest error function. So if we plug the cat into the AI, we would discover it is not very much like guacamole. But again, same as before, we know where we are on the graph and we know which way is down. We could make it a little bit more like guacamole, and we could keep going and keep going and keep going. And eventually the cat would be transformed into guacamole. I wanted to try this myself. I did not turn cats into guacamole. I decided to take those candles and I decided to see if I could turn them into mittens. Image of a mitten, image of a mitten, image of a mitten, image of a mitten. Okay. This was very fun to learn, but does it actually mean anything for us? I would like to say, invite you all to believe that we can easily make images that AI cannot classify. It's not to say everyone can, but I think everyone in this room can. I am not from a Fortune 500 company with unlimited GPUs. I just did this on my laptop for fun in my spare time, and you all could as well. We can also make it an AI misclassify something to be a specific target. So if you really wanted to, and you felt that some sort of service was automating the classification of images upload, it wouldn't take that much to make it misclassify an image as something else. The most important thing, if you take anything away from this talk, is artificial intelligence is fallible. A lot of the examples I gave were quite silly, but earlier on in the talk, I also showed some examples of where AI is being used and the fact that it's not been properly scrutinized as the technology is causing serious harm. We are using AI to decide who deserves to get jobs, mortgages, enter a country, and we don't really know how it works some of the time, and that's a bit scary to me. If you remember this graph I showed you earlier on in the talk, I think I said something along the lines of, 2015 was the year that AI got better than humans at recognizing images. It was probably a line a lot of the media ran with at the time. I don't actually think that's true. 2015 was a big year for the field, but it's not the year AI got better than humans at image classification. It's the year AI beat humans in a specific competition with only 1,000 items to classify. And I think there's still a lot of research to do before we can actually consider AI as truly being better than humans at recognizing images. Aside from that, the researchers have taken this further since then. They decided to see if they could 3D print models that confused AI. And as you can see here, you've got a nice little turtle that was 3D printed and painted, but unfortunately Inception will, from many different angles, classify this as a rifle instead of a turtle. Oh yeah, right, the AI apocalypse. I lied. I don't actually think there will be an AI apocalypse. I do not think that artificial intelligence is going to take over the world. But I do think that if we as programmers do not properly scrutinize this technology when we are implementing it, we stand to make the world a lot worse. So I would encourage everyone, especially if you're going into this field, please take care with what you are building. I would say I do like AI. Occasionally I get to work on it in my day job, and when I do, it's really fun. I just hope I don't ruin anyone's life with it. Thank you so much for listening. Oh, sorry, I should say, there's a whole blog post right with this. And if you want to try it yourself, I've uploaded several Jupyter notebooks for you to replicate the results I wanted if you want to get a bit more into AI. And I'd also like to say, we made a mistake a while back and ordered far too many Raspberry Pi Picos. I would like this box to be empty by the end of this evening. So if you would like a Raspberry Pi Pico, or two after everyone's had one, please do come over and collect them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, once you've picked up some goodies, you get back to your seat, we'll have our next talk in just a moment. Okay, welcome back. The next talk is from someone who may be familiar to some of you. LikKan was a part of CSS, but has now been cast out and is banished to Kainos. So we'd like to welcome LikKan to the stage.
Microphone on.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is LikKan. Thanks very much, Jacob, for the introduction. As you just said, I've joined Kainos. I'm a graduate now, and I'm a software engineer. Today, I'm going to talk about AWS. What is AWS? What is the cloud? And why do people keep using it? And all those questions and answers to come. So, what is AWS? Why do people keep using it? Simple answer is it's better. Thanks very much. No, it's better, but what does that mean? What is it better than? Well, let's find out. So, what is the journey of a software company? What is the journey of a startup? And how do they get into the cloud? So, most companies start off at home. If you make a startup, you're going to buy a server. It's just you're going to put it in your house somewhere, connect it to your parents' internet, and probably not pay rent or electricity for it. As your business becomes more successful, you're going to buy a few more servers, you're going to hire a few more staff, and then you're going to move into an office. When you move into an office, you've got a bit more space, you've got to pay rent, you've got to pay electricity, and a few more facility costs. Eventually, your business becomes really successful, and you're going to move into a data center. You build a data center, or you hire some space in the data center, and then one of your servers fails. You've got to buy more servers. And you can see the costs of running your IT company, your successful business, keeps adding up and up. So how do we fix that? We start using the cloud. So what is the cloud? It's a lot of servers in the sky. No, it's not. Companies like AWS and Google, Microsoft, they have a large global presence, and they've built a lot of data centers around the world already. And we can use that to start our business. So what does AWS do? Basically, it provides you on-demand IT services and resources instantly. You can provision resources like computing servers, databases, APIs, ML, machine learning things to find out if your cat's is guacamole. You can do that in an instant, and you don't pay that much for it. You pay as you go, basically. You're not going to provision weeks or months of time to buy a server and put it in some data center. You can use it in a few minutes. AWS has a global infrastructure in 32 regions in almost 250 countries. So you can get global reach really in minutes. And what AWS excels at is providing you a global infrastructure, infrastructure as a service. So you don't have to worry about managing your bare metal, you just use it. AWS provides platforms as a service. So you can just roll out your VMs and software as a service as well. So you can just buy services that let you do your ML. That's not one. But the main thing about AWS and about cloud is this thing called serverless. When you run a server, you have to provision an operating system and you provision your computer services. That is something that AWS offers through something like Elastic Cloud Compute or EC2. You can buy a VM instance, a virtual machine instance, and use it straight away. You can do that, but you have to pay a bit more for it. There's a paradigm called serverless that allows you to not need to do that. You can deploy code in event-driven functions. So you're deploying your applications into AWS in the cloud, but you don't have to worry about provisioning servers. They scale automatically. So what does that mean? When you provision a virtual machine or an instance of EC2, you have to think about how much computing, CPUs, how much memory you need, what the bandwidth is, and you pay for all of that. If you use it or not, if it's busy, if it's not busy, you're going to pay for it. With things like AWS Lambda, you can pay for how much of it you actually use. That means it's really good for your short short programming loads, whereas EC2 is good for running game servers, for example. So who actually uses AWS? Talked about some of the properties of running software in the cloud, but let's think about who its customers are. Netflix. So I imagine a lot of you watch Netflix every day. Who has a Netflix account? Yeah, exactly. Netflix is the largest video streaming service globally. They serve over 2 million users in almost every country in the world, over almost 200 countries. And 125 million hours of content is streamed through Netflix every day. If you think about what I was talking about earlier in the on-premises data centers, that's quite a lot. How many servers do you need to stream that many millions of hours of content a day? And how many do you need to have global presence so you can serve your customers with low latency, high availability all across the globe? Well, that's why Netflix has gone to AWS for an answer. Netflix uses AWS for almost all of its computing needs, from computing, databases, analytics, probably payments, everything you think of around Netflix. And they use more than 100,000 server instances on AWS. That's quite a lot if you were going to do that, build that from scratch with brick and mortar data centers as well. Another case study that I want to talk about is what we do at Kainos and how we work with AWS. So Kainos is a AWS partner, and we've done a lot of work with government departments, for example, in the public sector. One of our more successful projects in the last few years has been migrating and modernizing the MOT services. So any of you drivers, if you have a car, you might know that you have to get an MOT every year on your car to make it safe and make sure it's safe for the roads. Tracking those MOTs used to be in a global mainframe-based server. There's some on-premise data center somewhere in the UK. Part of the work that we did at Kainos was to migrate that and make that modern in a highly scalable, robust, and most importantly, secure way. That's a lot of data that we've had to process. So 42 million MOT tests per year with 66,000 MOT testers and over 24,000 garages and sites across the UK. That's quite a big challenge, and we used AWS to solve quite a lot of the problems we've had with the old MOT system, which was almost 20 years old. So what did AWS have what did the cloud have that we could use to solve some of these problems? Well, doing MOTs was quite labor intensive, and we use AWS's IoT offerings, Internet of Things, to connect garage equipment together. That improved efficiency, improved the quality of MOT services, reducing errors, and actually saves 1 to 2 minutes of time per MOT test. That helps you as a driver get out of the MOT center faster. And you might not think it's that much, it's 1 minute, 2 minutes per test, but actually across a day, across a week, across the year, that saves £42 million of wasted time across the UK. Another problem was that you could MOT tests could be fraudulent. There are 66,000 testers, individuals, over 25,000 sites. How does the DVSA, the Vehicle Standards Agency, manage that and find those garages which are just passing MOT tests without actually doing the checks? AWS SageMaker comes into play here to run your predictive analysis and risk rating to optimize DVSA enforcement and staff distribution. And that saves a statistic that I've forgotten. So that helped staff distribution across the UK and reduced fraud and rule out those bad garages. Serverless, as I've talked about, is another big thing. We used AWS Lambda and serverless tech to let drivers get reminders for free on when the MOT is due. That meant that 2 million drivers per year could remember when the MOT is, and that actually reduced missed MOT appointments by 50%. So this is just a case study of how we at Kainos use AWS. There's plenty more you can read on our website as well. But this agility helped develop and allow the DVSA to keep up to date with the vehicle industry as it developed. But why would you want to use AWS? Why would you want to use cloud? I've already talked a bit about this before. Speed and agility, that is one of the key concepts of using cloud, using serverless. Speed and agility means that you can resource the right size instances of your compute services, use the right resources that you need, and provision them in minutes and days instead of weeks and months. If you're making a startup, that is really crucial to success of your business. Using the cloud reduces your upfront costs. You don't have to buy those bare metal machines anymore. You can just purchase them in the cloud, and that helps you again to start up your business a lot quicker and faster and cheaper. And that means that more people use AWS, and when more people use AWS, Amazon can invest more in their services and provide cheaper cheaper services. You can use the right sized instance for you. You don't have to pay more than you need to, and that helps you save money overall. I've already talked about global reach twice. AWS has all these data centers around the world, and that provides access in minutes from America to Asia. You can get global customers. And another important thing about the cloud is shared responsibility. So you can hand off management of your system, the infrastructure over to these cloud providers, AWS, Google, Amazon, AWS, Google, Microsoft, whoever it is. They have responsibility over the physical security, running the electricity, paying those bills. So you can focus on starting your applications, getting them in the cloud, and focusing on your business. And again, as I hinted to, the breadth of services, the more investment that customers make into AWS, the more investment that Amazon can give back and develop things, software services, where you can focus on your solution instead of building a building with bricks. So how can you get started? I've told you about AWS and the cloud, but what can you do to play around with this and investigate? So AWS has a lot of tutorials online, so you can make a website. How many of you have a website, a personal website? And any of you using AWS? Yes, websites like cssbham.com. You can host those on GitHub if you want to. But you can also make things like a dynamic website if you like as well. Very good website, cssbham.com. You should go and join and something like that. Yes, you can do things like hosting your website. You can make your website use Lambdas, for example, and generate dynamic content. Just some ideas. You can use the cloud, use AWS, use Google for your next cloud project, for your next hackathon project. A lot of hackathons might give you free credits. Definitely use them, utilize them, or keep them for the future when you think of another project that can live in the cloud. And finally, at Kainos, we have an AWS bootcamp and jam that we run for in every summer, and you can learn about more practicalities of using AWS. But you might be wondering, how much does it actually cost? It's not free. but there are things like free trials. You can get AWS free tier, so you can create EC2 instances, computing instances, S3 buckets, which is storage. You can host a relational database, so your SQL databases, MySQL, PostgreSQL, create APIs on Amazon. You can use Amazon Lex, which is if you want to make a chatbot, for example, or Pinpoint if you want to send notifications to users. You can utilize AWS's free tier for 12 months to play around with these resources and get to try them out a bit, or use them for your hackathon project. But there's also always free in trials as well. So you will always get the first 25 gigabytes of a DynamoDB instance or an AWS Lambda. You get the first 1 million requests per month for free. So you can host a website for free on AWS. You can run your continuous integration pipelines on AWS. You can also try out things like SageMaker, which is for your machine learning, working on your cats, as I mentioned already. Redshift, your analytics, or DeepRacer for running models of racing cars. So use these things, use AWS, use the cloud, experiment with projects, because a lot of things run on the cloud nowadays. So yeah, that's a short intro to AWS in the cloud. Thank you for coming to my tech talk. Please have a look at our website and look at our case studies. And if you have any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Discord as well. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not going to reach into LikKan's ass to grab that, but pizza is sort of on its way soon. Okay, could the designated pizza carriers carry? That was just perfect timing, actually. What we're going to do is have a complex pizza algorithm, which is that it'll be lined up at the front, and if you go that way, and then we sort of circle back round, and then you'll return to your seat whilst having picked up pizza in a conveyor belt fashion. It's going to be really smooth. Yeah, so we're going to have pizza and a quick sort of break for 20 minutes or so, and then we'll continue the next talk. Thank you very much. Hello. Ooh. Just while we're waiting, I thought I'd sort of just tell you, thank you. I just thought I'd tell you about upcoming CSS events. In fact, in a week and a bit, on the 22nd of March, we are doing a Nerds Night Out. If you want to come to the Indie Lounge and then Gatecrash Sports Night, we're going to do that. And that's like most of our event. Oh, there's some Accenture thing tomorrow. If you look on announcements, there's some Accenture thing tomorrow. But more importantly, after Easter, there will be the CSS Ball, which hopefully everyone's looking forward to. More details and tickets will be released in due course. And there is also the AGM after Easter, where it's your opportunity to stand where I am and help out with other things. If you care about CSS, if you'd like to do some decent things, then this is your chance to help out. So we'll like put out announcements and stuff when it comes to it, but I just thought I'd let you know that is coming up. If you'd like to help out, consider it. Thanks. Yeah, LikKan approves, so it must be good, right? Okay, so some of the more observant among you may have realized there is pizza. The protocol is you come to this side, walk along, get pizza, then you go back to your seat that way. This way, no one will clash and it'll be fine. It's gonna be fine. There's lots of vegetarian and vegan stuff, so if you just ask, wow, look, someone's already not obeying the shame. There we go, thanks. Oh, there are plates and napkins and stuff, and people will give you the pizza. It's 2 slices each, and then maybe there's more. Okay. Ooh, that was a lot louder than I thought. There is enough for like another slice each if you want some. Again, we're going to go around in this direction, which does mean that these guys are long. No, it's fine. Yeah. Charlie, grab some pizza for yourself quick before the hordes of others get it. Yeah, so we'll do that. Then if you get back to your seat as quick as you can, we'll start with the next talk. Hello. I mean, there's still a bit of pizza left. So if you do want another slice of pizza, like, come for it. It's here. Charlie's not got his gloves on, but if you run, you can catch Charlie unawares.
All right, hello everyone. Can you hear me all right? Great. I hope you're all enjoying your pizza. And I'm here to give the next talk in the series. The topic is again robotics, but from a completely different perspective than earlier today. So earlier today we had the culture-aware robots that are meant to interact with humans, that are meant to socially interact and be aware of cultural differences. I'm looking more at a technical side of things. Especially I'm interested in making robots grasp things, grasp objects. And I'm Martin Rudofer. I'm a lecturer at Aston University, also here in Birmingham, teaching computer science and robotics. I've been here actually as a research fellow for 2 years at UOB, so worked here in the robotics lab as well. And before that, did my PhD in Berlin in Germany. Right, let's start this journey. And let's look first at what types of robots I want to talk about. So there's various types of robots known to the public. I think one famous robot that everyone would like to have at home is the Roomba to hoover up all the dust. Another famous one is the Boston Dynamics Spot. Maybe some of you have seen the videos where they try to make it fall over and push it, and the control is actually incredible, and it's able to recover from all that and keep its balance. There's also drones for various purposes, be it either just surveying using cameras, or all sorts of other purposes. There's the Pepper robot by SoftBank Robotics, which is more a humanoid style robot. And actually there's one in the lab of the robotics lab at UOB. And this is more the type of robot that then is meant for these social interactions, right? So if you want to communicate with people, if you want to give them some advice, maybe in a hotel, kind of navigate them around if they want to know where the nearest bathrooms are or whatever. Then another type of robot that the UOB Robotics Lab has is the Adapt Pioneer. And that's actually also a robot that is used in teaching. I think in the master's course, though, not in the undergraduate courses. And that's an example for mobile platform, right? Can move around, is wheeled, so that makes it much easier to control than the legged robot of Boston Dynamics. And this particular example is a really good robot to teach sort of the basic concepts of navigating around. It has a lot of sensors for like a camera, range sensors to measure the distance to obstacles and to actually also avoid running into those obstacles. And then we have more industrial-like robot arms. This is the Franca Panda robot. That's actually the robot I have worked with the most here at UOB. And you find a lot of these sort of 6 degrees of freedom because they have 6 moving joints where they can move the arm. So these 6 degrees of freedom manipulator arms is sort of the most, or a very common type of industrial robots. But the most common type of industrial robots is actually something you would probably not have guessed. As a simple thing like that is a so-called gantry robot, which is just one single linear axis moving about. And that is fantastically easy to control, very simple, and it does already a lot of jobs, from potentially moving an item from A to B. If you think of a port with containers, you need to grab a container, move it onto the ship. That's one axis plus up and down. That's all you really need. And you have already a thing that would be considered a robot. So you see the definition of robot is very, very sort of vast. We have various things. All of these things are somehow embodied. So they have some form of physicality. And that's in contrast to some things like Siri or Alexa, which are basically AIs that are just digital assistants. So some do, but I wouldn't technically consider those robots. So as I mentioned before, the robot I've worked with a lot is the Panda robot, which is sort of representative for these industrial manipulator arm robots. And if you look at where in the world these kind of robots are used, then we find this statistic. It's actually, I must be honest, it's a statistic from 2020. So, you know, with the pandemic happening, a lot of assets have been, or like investments have been stopped. So this is a bit of a skewed and non-representative version. But you get the gist. So the main markets or main applications for industrial robots are sort of electronics and automotive manufacturing. So the countries who have a lot of that will also employ more robots. And we see high up the list China with 168,000 installations of new robots in 2020, despite the pandemic going on. I guess they still had a very, well, I'm not sure. Anyway, then Japan is next, also electronics and automotive, United States, Korea, Germany, and then it kind of drops down. And we find UK in this list as well, rather a bit down, but the UK also has a plan of investing in robotics, and where they see sort of the biggest trends in the next years is this, this warehouse logistics part. So warehouse logistics, that's companies like Amazon, like Ocado, who are grocery logistics, right? If you want some groceries delivered to your door, then it's likely to be fulfilled by them. So these are big companies that operate in the UK that heavily rely on warehouse logistics. Especially Amazon is keen on automating every single bit of that chain. And you can imagine that putting stuff into shelves and retrieving it from shelves, that's sort of the most difficult part of that pipeline. But then actually moving towards the shelf or transporting between two spots, I think these processes are already highly automated. So it's really just about that picking and retrieving that is sort of one of the last remaining challenges in automating it to an even higher degree. One interesting aspect that we also see is other, like completely other domains, agriculture. So that could be picking crops, harvesting, say, strawberries or other foods, where you really have to. So first of all, it's a computer vision challenge. You have to recognize what's a harvestable item. And then for grasping them, you need to kind of deliberately pull it away without damaging it. So that can be quite challenging as well, to not kind of smush the strawberry, because then it would lose its value, because no one of you would want to buy a smushed strawberry, right? And then also other aspects are the food and drink services or health and social care. One thing that struck me when I learned about it was that the most common reason for elderly adults to become dependent or to lose their independence at home is because they start falling. They have falls. When they fall for the first time, the likelihood of a fall reoccurring gets much higher, and then they get sent to hospital because of that. Yeah, so on the one hand, they lose their independence, cannot stay alone at home. On the other hand, they incur costs to the NHS. So people are thinking of applying robots into care homes or into homes to basically pick up items from the ground, because that kind of leaning over, picking up stuff from the ground is one major cause of people falling over. So there's really several aspects where currently there's not much, say, growth predicted, but that's because the technologies are not yet there. If we manage to improve on the grasping and manipulation capabilities of those robots, then we could unlock several more of these domains and achieve even higher growth. Right, so when I talk about grasping stuff, then there's obviously our human hand that we think about, because that's what we use to grasp objects, but robots use very different tools. In fact, we have like very creative engineers. They can think of all sorts of gripper types. So one very common gripper type is sort of a two-finger gripper, where I just have two parallel fingertips, and I close them with a certain force, and I can grasp an object. So that covers, in fact, many objects. So yeah, there's many objects I can grasp with a simple two-finger gripper. There's different types of two-finger grippers, obviously. There's many manufacturers producing them. There's also three-finger grippers, because you can imagine if I have like a triangular shaped object with a two-finger gripper, it will always kind of slide away no matter from which side I grasp it. With a three-finger gripper, it makes it much more robust to grasp such objects. And also these kind of cylindrical objects, if I have three fingers, then I can hold them much more steadily. If I only have two fingers, then they have sort of this swinging degree of freedom. So I need a lot of force to kind of prevent that. If I have three fingers, then it's much easier to grasp. Then there's also sort of flexible adaptive grippers, where they realize that the point of contact is very important. If I only have a point of contact, like a small area of contact, then obviously the pressure I need, the force I need is much higher to achieve the same pressure. And if I would have like soft fingers that kind of wrap around the object, I can maximize the surface area, maximize the contact area, and therefore have a more robust grasp. Obviously, there's also researchers working on more human-like hands, but it turns out human-like hands are very complex. We have like, I think 40 joints, 40 degrees of freedom in our hand. The types of movements we can do with our fingers is incredible. I could, for example, just grasp like this. And that's something this hand here, the DLR hand, wouldn't even be able to do because those degrees of freedom are not even implemented. So it can only grasp, sort of close the fingers. There's another company, Shadow Robots. They are actually located in Bristol, so not too far away. And they are developing the dexterous hand. So they are really trying to be a bit closer to the human-like model and not to simplify it too much. So I think this is the commercially available hand with the highest number of degrees of freedom. So highest versatility, most similar to the human hand. However, these type of hands are actually not really used that much especially not in industrial applications, because the problem is that because of this high number of joints and this versatility, it's actually hard to find control algorithms to make them grasp. Like if you remember the two-finger gripper, I basically close the fingertips and then either I've grasped the object or I haven't. And there's not much else I can do with those two fingers. With 5 fingers or with human-like hands, I could like grasp it like that. I could pretend I only use 2 fingers, grasp it like that, could grasp it with 3 fingers. So there's various types of grasps possible, which is cool. But also we need to have some algorithm to decide how will I actually grasp this bottle now. So it adds more complexity, not only in the hardware, also in the software. The complete contrast to this is the vacuum gripper, or also suction cup gripper. So it's a completely different principle. Yeah, suction cup, I just need to apply it to some smooth surface. Then it creates a vacuum by sucking the air out, and the object will stick to it. So super simple. The only control algorithm I need is find some flat surface on the object and then just lift it up. And in fact, these type of grippers are very, very common in industry because of their simplicity. They're fairly cheap and they're fairly scalable as well. So I can even pick up items that weigh like several hundred kilos with these kind of grippers, which if I would want to have a fingered gripper with that kind of load, that would be much more difficult to do. And finally, there's also these funky grippers, this octopus style gripper, which tries to imitate nature. Again, it's cool principles. I like it a lot, but actually controlling them is difficult because these are like one-off models. You cannot resort to off-the-shelf algorithms to control algorithms. Just download something from GitHub. That's usually not possible here. So yeah, what I focused on was two-finger grippers because they are sort of a good trade-off. You can grasp most of the objects if you find a correct grasping point, if you find the correct contact points, but still it's fairly simple to use, fairly easy to control those grippers. Now, in what kind of scenarios did I consider, or was my research founded? So there's one scenario, that's the manufacturing context. So these automotive industries, we know in advance what kind of objects we'll encounter. We know the environment because it's just a robot cell. So the robot is not even in contact with humans, it's just behind some fence. We can design where the objects arrive that need to be grasped. So in fact, the movement that the robot executes is usually a predefined movement. It doesn't even look where the object is. It's just pre-programmed motion. And it's made to be highly repetitive at high speeds. Then there's more collaborative robots now, where we still have industrial tasks. So we usually know what kind of objects we deal with. But now the robot is supposed to work in conjunction with a human and help them out, kind of like as a little helper, basically, in the workshop. And this is much more challenging because now the safety is an issue. The robot needs to be aware of its surrounding. It cannot just go at full speed. If the human happens to be in the way, it needs to brake and stop in order to ensure the safe application. And then finally, if we take it even further, we can consider robots in households. They also interact with objects, but these type of objects, I say from an engineering point of view, I don't know in advance what the exact object geometries are. I know they're probably, if it's like a KitchenAid robot, it will probably have to deal with cutlery, with plates and bowls. But again, I know the category of object, but not the exact shape. So that makes a lot of difference when I design the algorithms. So let's take a look at what types of algorithms we actually have, or general approaches for vision-based grasping. So the first approach I already mentioned, it was if I have known objects and a very well-defined environment, I can just execute the same motion over again. So I just predefine the motion once and then repeat it. That's not so interesting, but it is actually interesting because 99% of all industrial applications work like that, right? But that's what we kind of want to move away from. So the second line is if we have known objects, but we don't know where they are and we want to grasp them, then the first step is locate them. So we have an image of the object. We want to know from that image where exactly is the object located. If I find the exact position and orientation of the object, then I can just select a grasp. And because I know the object geometry, I can exploit the geometry to basically predefine certain grasps. Okay, if I know it's going to be this bottle, then I can just save this grasp. And then every time the robot sees this bottle, it will go here and execute exactly the same grasp. And then finally, the third line is the most challenging part, where we have unknown objects and also changing environments. So we need to detect the object in the image, but we only have one image of the object. So, right, if I see this bottle only from this side, I don't actually know how it looks from the back. In the case of the bottle, you all say, yeah, it's a cylindrical object. I know that, but that's because we know how these bottles work. We know it's a cylindrical object. If you've never seen it before and there would be maybe a handle on the side, then it would fool you in that way. So the robot kind of has to make assumptions about how these objects would usually look like. And basically only from the visible surface area, it has to decide how to approach and grasp this object. So that's the most challenging part, and that's where most research these days lies. So how would a robot actually go on about grasping? You see the robot is on the left-hand side. We have here on the right-hand side, that's a so-called point cloud representation. So usually we don't just use a regular camera image, but we use also the depth information, which gives us basically the distance information of each pixel to the camera center. And using that, we can create these point clouds. So we convert each pixel of that image into an XYZ coordinate, and that's a point in space. And then we plan basically one contact point here, one contact point here, and from that we infer how exactly the gripper needs to be located. And the procedure, how it would work, is the robot starts in its home position, it moves somehow into a pre-grasp pose above the object, then it goes into the grasp pose it closes its fingers, and then it would lift the object. So that's how most of these approaches work. And I'll show now one example of autonomous robotic assembly where I worked on a project, which kind of highlights this industrial context. And then I'll show another example which highlights the more challenging scenario with unknown object geometries. So the autonomous robotic assembly, that was actually 2018, so already 5 years ago. And we were in the assembly challenge at the World Robot Summit in Tokyo. We managed to qualify for the final, and there were 3 tasks in this final. So one was a task board where we had items here on the left. They were just lying in random positions. So we wouldn't know where they were, but we wouldn't know what type of items these are. That's exactly we know the object geometry, but we don't know where they are. And then on the right-hand side, there's the task board where the items from the left need to be assembled on the right. So for each bolt, there's a suitable hole where it goes in, and so on. Then the second task is a kitting task. So the challenge here is we have these bins where there's always one type of item in this bin, but it's kind of very chaotic. It's just thrown in there. And then we would get a list of items to collect into those trays down here. And the task is then for the robot to basically pick an item from those boxes and put them in the tray. And then finally, the third task was putting it all together to a belt drive unit. So you can imagine that's sort of the most difficult part. And I think of all the teams that participated in that challenge, there was only one that could eventually assemble this belt drive unit. Right, so how did the system look like that we used to tackle these challenges? This is now the example of the first task of the task board. So you see the items here on the right and the actual board on the left. We had this robot that's again what's happening? Cheers. Oh. Thank you very much for the support. All right. So where was I? Yeah, our robotic setup. So the universal robot is an industrial manipulator arm, much like the Franka Panda that I've shown earlier. And you see now we have actually 2 different cameras, one camera at the top to locate roughly where the object is, and then one camera at the gripper. So you see a close-up of the gripper on the left. Actually, the camera is literally on top of the gripper to actually see where the gripper is navigating and more fine-tune the exact position where we grasp the object. 2 other things I'd like to highlight in this picture is actually the gripper design and the screw slide. So if you look at this gripper design, you find these interesting fingertips that we specially made, and they kind of move into each other and then describe this sort of diamond shape. And that's very cool if you want to grasp circular objects, because they automatically align, they get automatically centered when you grasp them. So there's a bit of clever engineering also required to adjust or to allow for these high accuracies that are required for the assembly processes. And then the screw slide, that was a 3D printed rig basically that we used. We dropped the screw because if we picked a screw, we didn't know what the orientation of that screw was, and we need to pick it by its head in order to be able to put it somewhere. So we just dropped the screw on top of it, and then it would slide down this rail and automatically get oriented. And then we just regrasped it at the end of that rail, and we knew it was oriented correctly. So when you know what kind of objects you're dealing with, when you know the exact object geometries, then you can build these little helpers like that, that actually make the task much easier for the robot. But obviously, if we don't have those information about the object geometries, then it's going to be much more difficult. And that is what I want to look at next. Yes, so grasping unknown objects. So we want to use learning-based approaches for that. But the great challenge of those is we need training data. Realistic training data in robotics is always a problem. And there was one study actually using 14 robots for 2 months, just letting them grasp and collect grasp trials to learn a hand-eye coordination of those robots. And they collected 800,000 grasp trials with this massive study. And if you think of data sets like ImageNet for computer vision, then 800,000 isn't actually that much. So even despite these massive efforts, it's kind of still difficult to collect enough data. Now, how do we overcome this? We usually use simulation-based environments, use physics engines such as Bullet or ISAC-Sim to actually physically simulate the grasping trials. And that way we can get a lot of annotations almost for free. I say almost for free because it comes at a cost. And the cost is that there's a gap between simulation and the real world. So if we train something in simulation, then we just apply to the real world, then the performance will usually be quite poor because there's like some subtle differences between simulation and real world. And the deep learning models, that's basically just statistical learning. So it learns the exact statistical characteristics of the simulation, and those might not apply in the real world. So there's a couple of strategies to overcome this, but yeah, let me first exploit this concept of learning in simulation. That's what we've done for one project where we basically had this RGBD scenes rendered, so some objects in simulation. We had some grasps also simulated and executed in simulation, recorded whether they were successful or not successful. And then we used that to train a model that could then predict grasps on real scenes. You remember the point cloud representation that I talked about earlier? So basically, we were only using those point clouds. We were not using the color information of the camera. And that tends to be much less susceptible for this simulation to reality gap. Because we only use basically the distances, the shape information, and not any color or anything. And it tends to work quite well. So you see on the left-hand side, the GPNet is our competitor. On the right-hand side, L2G is our learning to grasp approach that basically sampled contact points on the visible object surface, and then from that inferred suitable grasp poses. And it's trained entirely in simulation. It has not even seen a single real try or real training data. Now, because of that gap, simulation versus reality, there's like two things that can happen. One is the visual domain gap. Things just look different than they are. And if I use a vision-based grasping approach, then obviously how it looks makes a huge difference. There's a lot of research about that, by the way. Then the other point is the physical domain gap. So executing a grasp in simulation is not exactly the same as executing a grasp in the real world. And we have created a toolbox that is actually open source that we could use to investigate the physical domain gap. I'll just go quickly over it. So you have a scene creation with 3D models, sample the grasps and execute them in simulation. But we also provided tools to actually set up the exact same scene with the exact same objects in the real world for real world experiments. So suddenly we had the means of executing the same grasps in the simulation and with a real robot and could compare, would it be the same outcome or would it not? Well, spoiler alert, it's not the same outcome. But more interestingly, we also found that it depends very much on the composition of the objects. So you see in the left-hand side image, the objects are quite far apart. On the right-hand side, the objects are much closer together. So if the robot tries to grasp something, the likelihood of collisions is much higher. And that's much harder to simulate. So you see the accuracy for that case is much lower than for the more isolated objects. Right, and that brings me to the last slide, current and future research directions. So one research direction would be actually consider the gripper geometry for the grasping. At the moment, we usually just consider the contact points, but the various, even two-finger grippers have different shapes, and that needs to be considered while grasping. Adding a sense of touch helps a lot, because if you think about it, I can basically almost without looking, I can grasp this bottle, I can even open it. I don't need my sense of vision there. And most systems these days work like that I look at it once, and then I would close my eyes and try to blindly find it. And if we try that, we are not able of doing that. So adding a sense of touch will massively help. But the research there is just about growing. Then in this talk, I've only talked about objects that are rigid, so that are solid, not deformable. If we think about glasses that can break, or eggs or strawberries where I have to apply a certain force, and if I exceed that force, I will actually damage that object, then that adds further challenges. Or also even deformable objects. If I have a towel and I'm grasping it, the towel will change its configuration. It will suddenly hang down. If I want to fold it, then I also need to consider the sort of internal configuration of the towel. Makes it much more complex. And finally, even when I've grasped something, I usually want to do something with that object, right? So if you consider using a pair of scissors versus handing it over to someone else, you would hold it differently. And that's information that we could already exploit while grasping the object. So there's also now some research starting on that topic. So it's a very interesting field. And yeah, if you're interested in that, I'm sure there's loads of opportunities at UOB as well to get in touch with robotics people. Thanks for your attention. And yeah.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Okay, we'll move on to our last talk in just a moment, but first we need to set up a load of stuff, so give us a mo. Okay, we should be good to go. There is a small bit of pizza, I think.
Yeah, tiny bit of pizza, feel free. I think it's only vegetarian. Which one's vegan?
Too slow.
And what?
Okay, cool. The next speaker is Jon Kingsley. He does all sorts of weird stuff. Sorry.
That is a description. All right, I'm going to run that there quickly because I talk a lot with my hands. And this is going to be a hot mess otherwise. That way. All right, everybody got me? Wonderful. Okay, all right, hello folks, how you doing? I am going to give you basically a very convoluted insight into my mind, possibly the worst talk you'll ever see. We'll figure it out as we go. I'm Jon, that's my proof. The ball of fur on the right is Oscar. He's basically how I rub a duck program, but with a rabbit. You can find me on Twitter and, actually not Twitter anymore, mostly Mastodon. That's it, it's how I judge my worth as a person. By day, I've done a bunch of different things. I spent a good chunk of time doing many fun things that I can't talk about in both government and financial services, spent a lot of time doing infrastructure for many various different places, done a lot of compliance stuff in more recent days, all very boring. By night, I sort of ended up sacking off a good chunk of the infrastructure for 2 years and went off and did a musical theatre degree, which was something. When I'm not getting paid to do any of those things, I occasionally get paid to set things on fire for money. I fly things very occasionally, and I like to break things a lot. And as a result of that, I occasionally tend to end up screaming at people on stages, mostly because I have a knack for finding very, very bad things, and it's always quite a lot of fun to talk about them. Quick disclaimer, I'm not representing my employer, especially given that I'm not currently employed. Some of these photos and talks may not be my own. Please don't sue me if you accidentally set yourself on fire during the course of this presentation, the usual. Okay, let's do a quick rundown of what we're going to talk about. We are going to discuss why the security community has failed in the past. We're going to discuss why the security community is failing in the present. We're going to discuss why the security community will fail in the future. Point being is that security is horrible, and I'm going to tell you why, because I love you. And if my parents' divorce taught me anything, it's that when you love someone, you tell them horrible things and then leave them for someone younger. So we're going to be primarily learning through fail, which means I'm going to explain what a thing is. I'm then going to explain why that thing caused something else to die a horrible, fiery death. Because as much as we like to give lovely, fluffy talks explaining how we do everything right, we very rarely talk about where we do things wrong. An example, you may think this is a nice little visual pun. You are a cute tea pie. I, in a chain of events that resulted in a very awkward Valentine's Day dinner, interpreted this as you are narrow, scolding, and irrational. Point being, everybody fails. And the goal here is to basically help you all out by process of elimination, because instead of explaining what the cool new IETF approved way to do it is, I'm going to show you how not to do it. And in theory, we should then narrow down what you should do. And also because if you can't laugh at yourself, then laugh at other people. Like, seriously, it works. We're going to talk about how light bulbs can spy on your home. We're going to talk about why all your work doors have basically no locks because of bad user sanitation. We're going to talk about how you can make certain brands of Wi-Fi router just give you their password by texting them. We're going to talk about how your car is fundamentally designed to kill you and there's nothing you can do about it. This car, in fact, according to this article, has murdered 14 people. I'm actually quite impressed. That's a higher number than I have. We're going to talk about how your mobile phone is probably sending all of your very carefully curated adult material to Russian spies. We're going to talk about Uzbekistan for some reason. We're going to talk about how printers are just flaming piles of garbage. We're going to talk about why the term serverless is a lie and everything that you know about it can be run on a device you probably use to pass your high school maths exams. And we're going to close on a quick refresher on why you should never trust trains.
There will be no therapy provided. People will be crying in the streets. The system is broken. We are all destined for eternal darkness at the hands of an unfeeling red team. So let's talk about computer security. Let's start with a fundamental truth here. Humans have been failing since the dawn of time. Took us a whole millennia to stop failing at trade. It took us several hundred years to learn how to start using fire, and then a few hundred more to invent a group of people to deal with what happens when you use fire very badly. Pick unrelated. And while the best way to get management excited about a disaster plan is to burn down the building across the street, I don't think corporate are going to be very happy when they come back to their office after driving their BMW in from their second holiday home in the Hamptons and find an expense receipt for $200 worth of gas, fire lighters, and a slightly singed ID card. Let's talk for a moment about cars, both the muse for some of America's greatest songs and nowadays essentially metal computer boxes on wheels. I bought a car a few years ago and decided that the first thing that I should do with it was plug myself into it and see what was going on under the hood. And what I found was utterly horrifying. There are entire swathes of things that you can just turn on and off arbitrarily. You can plug in factory extras and just have them work. There are 3 cameras, 14 ultrasonic sensors, 4 radar units, and 2 network switches in this car. It has a SIM card. We'll get to that. We now live in a world, basically, where when I say the word car keys, everyone thinks of this. But what I actually mean is a folder called car keys in the file system of your Tesla Model S, containing an RSA key pair to the VPN it connects to in order to inform benevolent car god Elon of your every movement. And that's not even the worst of it, because being able to get into your car remotely is one thing. Being able to just kill it in the middle of the highway is a whole other. Because in case you haven't noticed, you now have remotely networked access to the drivetrain of your car if you don't appropriately separate those systems. So there was a thing back in around 2015, 2016, where a couple of folks managed to enable remote control of a Jeep's engine, brakes, and a whole bunch of other minor systems just by knowing its public IP address. So you say, I didn't realize my car had a public IP address. Well, you also might not be aware that your car also has a SIM card and potentially its own private cell network, because a good chunk of anything built after around 2017 is probably doing telemetry back to its manufacturer. Yeah, mine has a SIM card. It's fun. Fortunately, there was a patch for this, which was very, very informatively designed as restricts functionality. That was the only patch note. But then we got a paper in January of last year, catchily titled, "Who Killed My Parked Car?" which casually dropped the bombshell that you can now do this shit even when the car's turned off, because wonderful. But at least, you know, modern car manufacturers care about maintaining overall security. And then you've got Tesla, who, so there was a fun leak a few years ago from, we can't formally like verify this, but the details seem to line up very suspiciously well with what they were doing at the time. So a quick run through of how Tesla's infrastructure operates, allegedly. They run their backend in a single data center on the worst VMware deployment known to man, unquote. They had a Jenkins pipeline failure that caused the entire fleet of cars to arbitrarily reboot for half an hour. They uploaded JSON to the cars that broke their own custom JSON parser and caused the cars to boot loop, with a solution to this being to write a script to mass SSH into every car in the fleet and delete that file. And you might be wondering, well, how do you SSH into every single car? Well, every car talks back to one OpenVPN server, except for the time when all the OpenVPN certificates expired, and they had to patch certificate validation out of it in order for the cars to reconnect, so that they could then push new certificates back out again. There's the system logs that are all stored in a single 700 terabyte MySQL database. And the fact that they were using WebKit that was so old that you could arbitrarily take the infotainment system over and just start throwing CAN bus traffic at the rest of the car. Fortunately, all of that got patched mostly, but if that's the tip of the iceberg, then imagine what's lurking underneath. And to make matters even worse, they're now shipping cars without USB ports. So I guess that is technically a solution to that problem. You can't hack it if you can't connect to it. Which leads us to our core problem here, right? Too many damn sockets. And this is a problem. Basically, everything has a socket nowadays. And thanks to the rise of the Internet of Things, we have a lot of stuff that's connected that really shouldn't be. And the reason that that's bad is because from a security perspective, every service that you have running on a machine is basically an open door. What we're doing now is just adding services to our office, to our homes and offices. And that's like adding doors, right? You've got to have some to get in and out, but you've got to limit how many, because then you just have to remember to lock 400 doors every time you leave the house. And it's not like we don't know how to do this. Like back in the 60s, everybody was horrified by the idea that people were going to wiretap our phones. And now we ask our wiretaps if cats eat pancakes. Which, again, is like, that's great. Turns out you can also shift your voice into ultrasonic frequencies and they'll still answer you. So instead of just shouting, "Hey Siri, open the front door," you can now really annoy your neighbor's dog while you're at it. Point being, lots of doors. We want less doors. And on top of that being bad from that perspective, it's also awful because you realize very quickly most of these systems are being checked by the people who built them, which is sort of like hiring Winnie the Pooh to consult on honey security issues. Like, there's a fairly distinct conflict of interest there. So let's go through a real life example of why IoT is potentially going to kill us all. So we have a particular brand of smart light bulb, which is configurable via smartphone. And what it does is it goes off and you can send it commands from the phone. It responds to those commands and it also forwards those commands to all the rest of the bulbs over a local wireless mesh network. So you can use Wireshark to analyze the packets going over that network. In case you just missed that last sentence, you can sniff the packet data being exchanged by light bulbs. This is not normal. So yeah, if you sniff the traffic, you quickly figure out that the light bulbs are exchanging your Wi-Fi password over that mesh network. And you might think, okay, well, I can just sniff that and steal the Wi-Fi password. But they exchange the password encrypted, which should be fine, except that you can reverse engineer the light bulb's firmware. So light bulbs now have firmware, number one. You can extract cryptographic keys from said firmware. This is not what Thomas Edison ever wanted. This is a horrific aberration. If you take the time to go through the binaries for this, you'll find that they all have the exact same hard-coded encryption key for exchanging those Wi-Fi credentials, meaning if you extract it once, you can now decrypt the network of every single house that uses this particular brand of light bulb, which is fine. I don't think this was like Thomas Edison's greatest idea. I don't think that he was just thought up one day that he was going to envision his brand new invention for bringing fire-free light to millions of people to result in turning their entire house into war games and having to play a couple of rounds of global thermonuclear war just to cycle the garage doors. But, you know, to each their own. Because as we all know, when it comes to broken carriage doors, remote controlled by light bulbs, the only winning move is not to play. Yeah, we've reached the point where your light bulb used to be a thing that provided a safe alternative to candles. Now it can get into all your stuff, which is great. So yeah, we dig out all the details in this. And what that then means is that if we leverage this, we now have access to everything else in the network. So we are now inside your network via LNS, or light bulb network insertion, as I've taken to calling it. And at this point, things start to get fun. Quick audience participation round. You see that green light at the top there? What do you think that tells you? That it's on? Yes, you are completely and utterly wrong. It is not tied to power. It is not indicative of the actual state of the camera. It has absolutely, you can literally just turn it off in app and it just turns off the light. It doesn't actually turn the camera off. And it still captures video and monitors your surroundings even while it's off, which, like, the thing is, the manufacturer says, well, it's definitely not sending anything to the internet. But if I had to explain the 10,000 reasons why you shouldn't trust the manufacturer to actually tell you what it does, that ship has basically sailed, come back to port, been shot, sank, dredged back up and sailed again. And, you know, they could just put the LED in line with the actual power line of the device, but that would align about as well with good security practice as well as anything. And if you thought that was misleading, I would like to introduce you to the peacock mantis shrimp. This is not a peacock, a mantis, or even a shrimp. Unfortunate. But this is not really the only example of people screwing up firmware in recent memory. I'm going to quickly touch on boot ROMs. So these are the first thing that's ever run in a modern piece of consumer hardware. This validates basically that everything else is allowed to run, and it's generally burned into the chip at build time. So the idea is you can't update the boot ROM because then you can also remove all of the various checks. What I've described there, you would generally hear referred to as level 1 boot ROM. There's also level 2 and all that generally tends to have more checks, but is also updatable. So if there's an issue, then the level 1 boot ROM can patch to level 2 and everything's happy. The problem with this comes when you, instead of implementing random number generation, you do this. So Nintendo decided that, yeah, no, we built this really great boot ROM system, but it's just a little bit too slow. So what we're going to do is just hard code the random number generation for our public key validation, which results in you being able to build a tiny little thing which jams 2 pins together in the side of a switch and then run a small amount of extra code and magically get roots to the entire device. Wonderful. The terrifying thing about this is that it is stupidly easy in a lot of cases to blow up a lot of these embedded platforms with bad software. Like as an example, at least in the Switch, a lot of the voltages are software controlled. Like when they were doing the research on this, they already caused temporary damage to one LCD and blew up a lithium cell as a result of getting those those details wrong. So it's quite easy to do some very horrible things if you don't quite get it right. Okay, speaking of accidentally failing so hard that you destroy your life's work, let's talk about Uzbekistan. A country that you think about so infrequently that there's an article titled 8 Reasons to Go to Uzbekistan contains such gems to entice you in as there are hardly any tourists and just the existence of vodka. Reasonable. And Uzbekistan is a really great example of a Soviet spin-off country with a repressive and much feared intelligence agency called the State Security Service. And they have spectacularly bad operational security. This, by the way, is their former head who was recently sentenced to 18 years in prison on charges including bribery, extortion, and forming a criminal enterprise. So clearly they're hiring the best. And they are bad at basically everything, not just from like basic intelligence, but to keeping anything they do a secret. They are so good at what they do that they set the WHOIS information on a domain they used for their malware to the address of their super secret military installation. Like these folks are class. But up until recently, no one had really heard of them. Like Uzbekistan wasn't really known for having a capability for cyber warfare. Then Kaspersky showed up. So Kaspersky discovered that they were suddenly getting a lot of reports of targeted attacks coming from a group called Sandcat. That is a Sandcat for explanation. Sandcat appeared to be the SSS's internal malware development division. And they were pretty well kitted out. They were buying exploits off of folks like NSO Group and Kandiru, neither of which are having the best year, ironically. We're using a lot of malware originally popularized in the UAE. They clearly knew their stuff. And Kaspersky discovered that Sandcat's developers had installed Kaspersky antivirus on one of their development machines to test whether their malware they were developing could bypass the detection tool. But they were using it with the telemetry reporting features turned on, which means that whenever it detects something, it sends it back to Kaspersky for analysis. Starting to see where the problem is here. So every time they would test their brand new state-of-the-art malware that they were building, Kaspersky would get a copy of it, pull the binaries back, and just start looking through it. Which meant that whenever any of their suppliers sent them a new exploit to lose, they arrived on a thumb drive, which they would then plug into the machine. Kaspersky would then scan and then pull all the files it deemed malicious, which meant that they were actively patching exploits before they ever even had a chance to use them. So they figure out the systems that they're using for development and testing here. They discover a bunch of these machines are using addresses specifically linked to a domain in Uzbekistan. And when they look at the registration for it, it shows a registration to an entity called Military Unit 02616. not the greatest of looks when your supposedly unattributable malware you can just whois back to a specific military unit. And what they then started doing was, well, they went, okay, our stuff's getting patched suspiciously quickly. So we're going to go and develop our own custom platform for running malware. Except Kaspersky got a handle on that as well, to the point where they weren't only uploading the binaries, they accidentally enabled something on one of the development machines where they were packaging screenshots within the test binaries. So Kaspersky had screenshots of their development machines, including all of the IP addresses that they were deploying this malware to. Like, you don't get better than this, because they basically figured out not only all of the IP addresses that they knew about, which meant that they were able to directly know, okay, yes, this actually is them, but also a whole bunch of ones that they didn't know about, which meant that they were able to go and actively like patch those out way earlier than they would have been able to otherwise. So at this point, the Kaspersky lot, I think, are just like drinking into their liver transplants while watching all of this go down. Like finally, after a bit, they sort of realize what's happening and it pieces off a bit. But they burned through hundreds of millions of dollars worth of exploits to do this, and also exploited this adorable cat's name, which I think is frankly indefensible, and is also a very good lesson on why you should never install antivirus as a malware developer. I can't believe I have to say that. That feels kind of like basic education. Okay, topic of further education, let's open some doors. Namely, every door in this airport, most hospitals, and every single branch of US Bancorp. Because the thing that all these buildings have in common, besides them all being part of a giant game of corporate monopoly, is that they all use a company called HID for access control. And HID are everywhere. If you've ever been inside an airport, university campus, hospital, government complex, you've probably seen one of this style of card reader standing guard over some kind of restricted area. And each one of these runs all the way back to one of these lovely boxes called a door controller. And this controls all the functions of the door, including locking, unlocking, schedules, alarms. What? Oh, there is. Wonderful. Do not apply what I'm about to teach you. I couldn't actually remember whether UOB was one of the campuses that still uses HID, but okay, this might get fun. So in order for these controllers to be easily integrated into existing access control setups, they have a network service called Discovery D. So in order to talk to them, your management system can basically send a discovery broadcast out on UDP, and all the door controllers respond with some lovely information, like their MAC address and their firmware version, and even a common name. Problem is, the Discovery D process is only supposed to do that. It also has a couple of undocumented features, including the ability to tell it when to blink the LED on the front of the device so that you can find them. Problem being, the way this works, you send it a command blink on packet, you send it the number of times you want it to blink, and it then builds up a path to mount apps bin blink and call system to then run that with the number as an argument. Any guesses on where this is about to go horrifically wrong? Yeah, so who would tell me the glaring problem with this thing? Yeah, turns out no sanitization on that argument, meaning you can just send it a Linux command wrapped in backticks and it gets executed as root. Which means that with like 3 UDP packets and no authentication whatsoever, you can permanently lock every single door connected to that controller on, and not just that, every single controller on the network, and not just that, you can do it in a way that makes it impossible for the remote management system to relock them. So at this point, I'm now buying stock in single malt whiskey distilleries, given the amount that I've ended up dealing with this. But if you thought this was the end of it, you horribly underestimate just how many things people have put on the internet. Let's do a quick fire round. Did you know Turing speakers have web servers? Additionally, you can send them MP3s and they'll just play them. This couldn't possibly go wrong. One of my personal favorites found a few years back, this is a cow milking machine. Gets even worse when you zoom in and find it seems to have a horse setting. Not quite sure how that one worked out. Just a second to internalize that one. Here's a ticket barrier I found in Amsterdam, just casually booting full-blown Linux with networking. Here's a bunch of IoT connected teddy bears, which casually leaked every single voice message a child had recorded into the thing. That's bad. Here's the world's most sociable shoe. Yeah, network connected shoe. The sole product of its kind, fortunately. Well, at least it was until Qualcomm patented it for some fucking reason. Here's an HDMI cable with built-in antivirus. Because if there's one thing that I need, it's a cable that will hide Bridgerton from me. Here's a Linux stack trace on a faucet. Here, I'm just going to read this out for you. Robot vacuum cleaner will emit a series of bees when it is in trouble. No. Here's a report about an internet-connected fish tank used to conduct a heist on a casino. I'm not joking, that's real. They got away with about $100 million. So if you're ever considering the possibility of, well, going into this particular industry, you may one day have a quote attributable such as, somebody got into the fish tank and used it to move around into other areas of the network. To top it off, did you know that the .bank TLD now provides you with extra security? It doesn't. So, what if I told you we can get even better than this? Let's talk about printers. Printers are fucking terrible, elder god-like manifestations of years of horrible engineering decisions tied together with nothing but PostScript and glue. Or at least mine is. It's mostly glue at this point. It's been taken apart enough times that I don't think it has a soul anymore. Let's talk about PostScript. Quick show of hands. Who knows what PostScript even is? Okay, that is the people I would expect to know what PostScript is. PostScript is a VM executed language. Yeah, it's basically, printers got complicated enough at some point that we needed a virtual machine run language in them that they use to print things, update themselves, execute arbitrary code, and kill God. PostScript is the kind of lovely language that has vulnerabilities described as being presumably present in every PostScript printer for the last 32 years. Yeah, we're going to get onto some of those. Printers are basically, if you thought there was any device in your house that you really could get arbitrary remote code execution on with very little effort, it's your printer. Because not only will they just arbitrarily run stuff that you send them, they also have the ability to store almost everything you print for indeterminate periods of time. And no, you can't find out where or delete it without getting into the printer. So let's talk about these folks. We have a couple of HPs, an OKI, and a massive Konica Minolta BizHub. These can all be exploited to arbitrarily expose passwords. It's also possible to cause quite significant physical damage to the brother printer, which also made me laugh because having to Google the phrase brother printer just made me imagine a long line of printers in robes quietly humming to each other about being out of ink. This last one happens because the exploit can force large numbers of rewrites to the NVRAM, which eventually bricks the printer out completely. So you may have heard of the great PewDiePie printer hack, which is not a phrase I ever thought I'd have to say in my life. Gist of this is that you had a couple of people back in 2017, 2018, who saw hundreds of thousands of printers connected to the public internet and thought, what if we send all of these a PostScript file that will just print a page telling them to subscribe to PewDiePie? And it worked so well that it didn't just affect normal printers, it even worked on label printers. And because nobody learns from this stuff, they did it again and even managed to double their attack surface from 50 to 100,000 printers, which, you know, props to you. Okay, enough faffing. Let's show you exactly how to get root on a printer. And thanks to me forgetting to change the color of this, that's a CVE you can't read. This particular one is a remote code execution in an HP printer. So we take a look at the printer, see what's going on with it. Nothing too surprising here. It's got HTTP servers listening on ports 80, 443, and 8080. LPD, which is the line printer daemon on 515, IPP, which is the internet printing protocol on 631, because you can't just have one printing protocol. And then also this thing on 9100 that's flagged as JetDirect, which generally means raw printing, which is referred to as HP proprietary, but basically what it means is that you can just smack PostScript at it and it will run it. So as an example, we throw some PJL over this, just via netcat, and it throws us back the name of the printer. And one of the fun things you can do with these is path traversal. So we can sort of list what's actually on it, and we see that we have a couple of files here. Then we start to work our way down the directory tree a little, a few //slashes, and it responds with a new list of directories. Looks like we might be onto something here. Bit of further digging, we find ourselves some interesting commands, but we try and run them and it generates a file error. But there's a few other commands that we can then leverage. So if we drop in a little fs query fs upload here, we can magically dump etc password and just pull that straight out of the printer and into our hands. But who cares about reading files? I want to write them. So what we do here is a little bit of fluff around this to basically write up a Python script to write to a specific area of the file. And unfortunately, this fails because the file's not mounted as writable. So I'll spare you some boring details of combing through it. But basically what you end up with is a setup where you can effectively use some very horrific stuff in PJL itself to buffer overflow your way into being able to write directly into the read-only file system, overwrite etc password, and bam, congratulations, you now have SSH onto your printer. Which is almost as bad an idea as actually pricing out a moat filled with snakes as a solution to a border crisis, which is a thing that happened. Someone had to print that. And you now have access to the write location that contains the startup scripts. So if you don't actually want to even bother overwriting etc password, congratulations. All you need to do is just drop a remote shell into the startup scripts directory, fire an snmp command at it to force a reboot, and congratulations, you're now root. And the other great thing about PostScript, it's actually Postgres, oh, that's another talk. When it goes wrong, it really goes wrong hard. Like sometimes it will just, as you can see here, it will print the debug log over the top of the thing you're trying to print. Sometimes it doesn't even care enough to do that and just prints you the stack trace. Like this is the proper old school stuff where like calling the print function would just automatically stop burning trees for you. I mean, God knows what happened here. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for dog man. I mean, I have to assume at some point that this is like not just a printing error, but a legitimate cry for help. This reads like someone who got a little bit too far down the path of Ernest Hemingway's Wikipedia page, which it turns out is an amazing read. Like this guy became the self-appointed leader of a band of village militia outside Paris, was brought up on charges of contravening the Geneva Convention and got away with it like a fucking champion. Okay, let's talk about trains. We're going to use buffer overflows to make a train disappear. Technically not buffer overflows, integer overflows, but I thought the pun was worth it. Let's clarify a little. We're going to make a train disappear from the signaling network, which is arguably far more dangerous. And in order to explain how this works, we first have to understand what integer overflow is. And in simple terms, you can think of this like a car odometer. So computers operate using registries, which have limited amounts of space, and you give them more than their maximum, they will do one of two things. It will either saturate, where it will simply set the registry to the maximum value as a failsafe, or wrap, where the next increment above the maximum sets off a chain of carryover additions, which means that you effectively wipe back down to the first value that you possibly could drop into there. Except danger will Robinson danger, because that red bit is outside the memory space that we're reading, because it's now carried over outside of what it can hold. So when it combines those two numbers, what it actually sees is this. And that's critical, because what we've done here is basically take 3 eggs, throw together those eggs, and end up with no eggs, which is fine. And I'm going to have to rephrase that because when I said it's fine, it's really not, because it's the exact same thing with train signaling systems. Because they have these wonderful things called axle counters. And like the name implies, they count the number of axles on a train as it passes through. And usually there's one at the entrance and the exit to a section of track to determine whether the line's clear. So it compares the number of axles that came in and the time to then determine the speed and if the train has actually cleared the area. Except the older equipment was built using 8-bit microcontrollers, meaning that if you are the Swiss and discover that you have trains with more than 255 axles, it disappears completely as soon as it clears the counter. Which, as you can imagine, the ramifications of this kind of thing can be quite problematic. It's just not a good time. Okay. Let's follow on our little loop of number-related fun. We're going to talk about something we call the calculator. Now, a lot of these things that I've touched on so far have been software-related. Today, we are going to delve into my strange addiction. I am basically a collector, but with calculators. I have a lot of calculators, and also a lot of other esoteric hardware, but that's besides the point for this. Yeah, much like a middle-aged divorcee with a collection of cats or sports cars, what started as a mild obsession has now become something that I acquire at every possible opportunity. So essentially what I'm going to do today is walk you through my weird petting zoo of devices. This stemmed primarily from the fact that since the inception of the modern pocket calculator, we've gotten infinitely more capable of putting complex things in very small devices. Yeah, it's like a babushka doll of self-hatred or something. So if our phones are 10,000 times more powerful than they were 10 years ago, how much more powerful are our calculators? Well, it turns out pretty goddamn powerful. Like some of the, there we go. Like some of these things have similar CPUs nowadays to modern smartphones of the early 2010s. And if we've reached the point in human history where we can basically take the entire original Mario sprite in the NES and fit that within the modern texture reserved for Mario's nipple, we can definitely fit some bullshit tech interest of the week thing on a calculator. So a lot of my day-to-day work tends to be in serverless. So I decided to figure out whether you really could make something truly serverless. And to most people, like the concept of cloud-based serverless essentially boils down to uploading code in order to run it on someone else's computer. Like relatively simple concept. You break it down, we get to essentially 2 steps: upload and invocation. Yeah, do the thing. Which, when you really think about it, is basically building a pipeline for remote code execution, which under any other circumstance would make people very horrified. So this seems relatively simple to replicate, so how hard can it be? Well, we need a method of transport to get our payload on the device. We need a method of transport to get our arguments on the device. We need a way to execute that payload, and we need a way to get it back again. And we're going to use MicroPython for all of these, since it's very small and fairly easily ported across platforms. So we grab ourselves a little example application where we just throw it in some input and it returns something off the back of it. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's look at our targets. We're going to start with Texas Instruments, the company that is most synonymous with graphing calculators, and also whatever the fresh hell this thing is, and also the speak and spell for some reason. So this thing is proprietary as hell, which means it's not that easy to break into. So we start with the file system, which is controlled through this unbelievably over-the-top binary protocol over USB. Fortunately, somebody with far less sanity than I have managed to document this thing very nicely. So that was relatively easy to get a handle on, which as a result, to be fair, just note there, 270 kilobyte per second transfer speed over USB. This thing would be quicker if you chiseled each byte into a stone slab. Like it is not the fastest thing in the world, despite the underlying hardware. But surprisingly, turns out there's a development tool chain for this thing, which is wonderful. So after a little tinkering around, we did the natural thing, which is getting Doom running on it as a starting point. Wait for this to load in. There we go. Takes a hot minute to boot. There we go. And the best part is that with a little bit of tweaking, this particular TI has a touchpad in the middle of the control direction. So you could actually patch that in to have like full like top-down touchpad controls for Doom, which is actually surprisingly nice as a player experience. And if you want to even go even further down the rabbit hole, you can stick a GBA emulator on it, and yeah, congratulations, it's a good time. As an example here, I will note with this one, significantly more difficult to play well. Doom is basically like point and shoot. Mario Kart with calculator controls gets a little bit more difficult, especially drifting. It's not like you have a conventional button setup here. You're basically subtracting your ABXY from on, off, dock, and menu. So you know, that's all well and good. But we are here to execute arbitrary code. So remember this joyous 10,000 line protocol from before? Well, turns out it's not as badly designed as you'd think. It's called NavNet. It lets you read and write traffic as your own service. So with a little bit of fluff and a little bit of very messy stuff, you crack open Wireshark, configure all your USB ports to loop back to a local network interface, and sniff the packet data, which looks a little bit like this. And you start to dig a little further down, you can essentially set up your own NavNet service, so you can effectively communicate with this like a serial port. And a little bit of digging later and some C, you get this. So we'll see if Zoom's able to keep up here, but what I am looking through here is little Python file, which we're going to send over to it over serial. Fire that at the thing, and then it will execute it. There we go. Execute it on the calculator remotely, and then send the result back to the computer that it's connected to, which is objectively faster than some Lambda deployments that I've had. There we go. So it's now run it, and then if we, ooh, that is shaky as hell. Thank you, Zoom. There we go. So we run the little invoke with the arguments, and then it should, off the back of it, spit out the result. Ooh. Please hold. There you go, uploading. So it's sends it over. Wait for a second. I think it might just, oh, there we go. Upload it, and then it will pull back the results from there. I'm going to skip through these because that's going to put me over time. That's UART adapters. That is horrific. That is DFU. Come on, how my animations have stuck me. That's always the fun one. Okay, so through all of these things, actually, you know what? I think we've got enough time. I can finish this one. I'm gonna get exciting. The speed run. Okay, so this is NumWorks. This is basically an Arduino built into a calculator, which I love because it is horrifically hackable. Their entire spiel is basically that they're as open source as these things come. Oh, that's fun. Is there a way to kick Zoom? Yeah, please hold. Where is it? Hello. I'm trying to figure out where it's gone.
Stop the sharing stand again.
Yeah, it's just, oh, there we go. Yep. Let's see if this plays ball. So I was about to say, no one could see that, could they? Please hold. 1, 2, 3. Yep, it says it's loading, which is fun. Oh. Yeah, yeah, I can tell. Try this. Yeah, I'm just trying to get this to play ball. Still loading. Sucks. Why is that? Oh my God. Oh, now we're back to this connecting thing again. Oh, that's a shot. Fingers crossed. Yes. Okay. There we go. Okay, we are going to speed run this now. The entire spec list is very punchy. We've got a megabyte of flash RAM, a bunch of other stuff, STM32, it's wonderful. Got lots of stuff, it's open source. You can look at the PCB files, it's wonderful. It also means that you can write little apps for it, which in my case was less a case of, okay, I'm going to write this, and more, can I port The Legend of Zelda to it? Which turns out the answer is surprisingly yes, and actually quite easily. NES emulators aren't massively complicated for STM. It just took a little bit of fluffing around the way that they specifically do apps. But yeah, you now have Legend of Zelda Phantom Calculator, which annoyingly does not have save states. That's the only thing that's particularly regrettable about this version. But you do get to go and pick up the sword, as is tradition. There you go. Okay. And if we go down the road of the serverless approach, we've now got the ability to pull over UART, which is a fairly well-known protocol for this stuff. Single wire data transfer supports everything from simplex, meaning one way, to duplex, meaning two-way. And it's great because we can basically just dump everything off the back of it. Packet structure is really simple. And to keep time each side, you essentially just clock both sides of the connection and then figure out how everything works there. So here we wait for it to catch up with me. Okay, we will wait for it together. That's done using a method called DFU, or device firmware upgrade, which essentially allows you to reflash the memory on device with a new firmware content. Okay, that is not what I was expecting to be there. Except basically, it's just copying data to. I'm just playing slideshow karaoke with myself at this point. This is wonderful. So basically, you're just. Yeah, that is DFU, isn't it? God, that is a firmware. That is a frame rate that I would be horrified by. So that's basically how Numworks solved it. So the DFU logic lets you write into areas of RAM as well as flash. So effectively what this means, with a little bit of fluff, is that you can, over web USB, build a little thing to write data and read data directly off of the device itself. Meaning without even having to go for any fancy tooling or anything, you can simply plug this thing in over USB, thanks to the glorious web USB standard, and just run code directly off of it. Okay. Let's finally chuck ourselves down to the end of it. Takeaways. Think very, very carefully about the design, not just of the things that you build, but of the things all around you. Reason being, most non-technical people aren't going to be able to decompile a light bulb or pen test your door controller. There's a very special level of responsibility that's assigned to us as folks who understand these things to take the initiative in crowbarring your way in to make sure that it isn't a bad actor. Stuff around you is a lot more powerful than you might think. I've done talks on all kinds of things in the past, and a lot of the stuff that you'd expect to have very little punch behind it can actually be running like full-blown Linux if you really go digging. Yep, everything from your dryer to your washing machine, regardless of its age, probably has some kind of toolkit, probably has something sitting under the hood. I recently bought a soldering iron that I could reflash, which was wonderful. Also worth noting, most people that are out to get you are not in fact hoodies wearing binary. They're probably just like things that haven't been particularly well implemented. And most of these things aren't going to be particularly obvious. They're probably going to be more like your flashlight app requiring access to your photos, microphone, and call history. I love this. This is like, we're playing like the 30-second joke lag where the gag that I put out just gets reiterated a second later. It's for the folks in the back. You'll love it. Yeah, last but certainly not least, please do not attempt to go through airport security with a bag full of calculators. I was doing this research while also doing a good chunk of travel over the last year. I have been searched in areas I did not know I had. It is not a fun experience. Do not try this at home. Yeah, and also definitely do not attempt to run live infrastructure on a cluster of graphing calculators. They are surprisingly resilient. I am not held responsible for any of the things that you might do in a production context. Related note, one of the things I'm working on with this is a MicroPython port of Flask to the numworks, because I really want to be able to add an IOPS calculator as a benchmark for continuous integration. And also, if I have to leave you with one thing, I'm just going to let it be this. If you're ever having a really bad day, like the worst possible day imaginable, I would like you to remember that A, you are not having to deal with the delay on these slides, but also that Xerox sold photocopiers for 8 years that would just randomly change numbers in the documents it scanned. You will never do worse than that. All right, thank you all very, very much for sitting around. Have a wonderful evening. Where would you like to go from here?
Well, in that case, thank you, everyone. Lovely. Yeah, just a brief round of applause to everyone who helped with the pizza and bringing everything in, everyone knows everything. Thanks to everyone who helped. And then finally, thanks to all our speakers, Jon and everyone else. It seemed pretty good, right? Thanks for coming. Exits that way. If you've got any rubbish at the back, just bring it down and jump in the bin.